line on the other streaming platforms. It is Tuesday, the 15th of February, 2022, just about 7:40 p.m. in the studios at Q95. I'm your host, Sheridan Gregoire, Mr. G. My distinguished guest tonight, historians Justice Dr. Irving Andre, an economist and financial consultant, Dr. Thomson Fontaine. And as I always say, many describe him as the uniter. We also have with us a little later on, maybe in another half hour or so, he'll join us. Uh, that is a social scientist and a friend of the family of our late first Prime Minister, Patrick Roland John, Mr. Simeon Joseph. He will join us in a little while. We also will have joining our conversation a little later on in the program, former Prime Minister Oliver J. Seraphin. And of course, we have with us tonight political scientist Dr. Dion George. So we continue our historic series on the lives and the leadership and the legacies of Dominica's political leaders. We presented tremendously useful, revealing information about the eras of Chief Minister Frank Barron and former Premier Edward Oliver LeBlanc. In our two previous shows last week, Dr. Andre and certainly Dr. Thomson Fontaine did a lot of justice in the history of those eras there. And so we spoke about it last week and the week before. But tonight, we focus on the eras of first Prime Minister Patrick Roland John and former Prime Minister Oliver J. Seraphin. But next week, we will focus on former Prime Minister Mary Eugenia Charles, and thereafter on the eras of former Prime Ministers Edison Chenfield James, Roosevelt Douglas, Pierre Charles, and current Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit, as we continue to take an in-depth, intimate comparative look at Dominica's political leaders over the years. Of course, tonight, because former Prime Minister Oliver Seraphin is a living Prime Minister, we had to bring him in when we come to discuss that part of the program so he can put in a word for himself. Obviously, he will communicate very closely with our historians to see whether, in fact, what he is saying or what we are reporting are correct. But we want to get to the facts of the history so we can educate all young people who know very little about our former leaders and their legacies, and their lives, and their leaderships. So who are they and where did they come from? What were they like? Well, you're going to hear from one of them tonight. Their style of leadership, how long did they stay as political leaders? Were they unifiers or were they dividers? What did they accomplish during their time? What was the state of the economy while they held office? Did they create significant jobs or foreign earnings? We're asking the same questions of all of these leaders in all of the eras. What was the state of the democracy during their tenure? Did they respect, uphold, and conform to the laws and to the Constitution? Were they corrupt? Did they practice big or prudent government? What were the major pillars of the economy in their era? Was it agriculture? Was it tourism? Was it, what was it? Was there resilience and sustainability of the people and the natural environment and the architectural heritage in their time? Was there peace? Was there justice? Was there unity and harmony and well-being among our Afro-Caribbean and Kalinago brothers and sisters at home and abroad as well during their tenure? And what is the legacy of each and every one of them? So here's a question. Again, we ask it, can we do better than we are doing now? Did we do better then in any of those eras than we are doing now? Are we better off now than we have been at any time over the past 50 years? Did they do right by the youth? Will always be the leaders and movers and shakers of the future. So I wanted to just put this in that, frame it in that way. And then, because, you know, in terms of context, we know, for example, and we'll see how these eras match up to that. We know right now, there's little financial support for bona fides entrepreneurs who are asked to take loans of maybe $15,000 to $30,000 at the aid bank or somewhere, who have no collateral to secure those loans. We know there's very little tangible resources or training for the youth. While close associates of the DLP regime get large sums of free CBI money to build Big hotels. Nothing wrong with building big hotels, but they get free money. Why can't the others get it? The little man. One recent example being the sum of some US 75 million or 204 million. We understand if the document we saw was correct, we understand was given to someone to build a hotel, where the bulk of that money is going to be distributed as fees to consultants and marketing operatives and to the owner of the alleged project. So we see often insufficient investments in education, in healthcare, in agriculture, in manufacturing, renewable energy, in agribusiness, in export for foreign earnings, or in meaningful sustainable employment. I mention those things because when we come to those eras, we'll do the comparison to see what existed there. And we know that there is a recent report from the IMF. I hope Dr. Thomson Fontaine will visit that with us and give us a sense of his opinion of what that report is doing as it analyzes the state of our economy. So stay with us on Q95, the big station, and on Facebook and on YouTube on this intriguing lecture series on the lives, leadership, and legacies of Dominica's political leaders. Distinguished guest, Justice Dr. Irving Andre, economist and financial consultant, Dr. Thomson Fontaine, social scientist Simeon Joseph, will join us a little later. Former Prime Minister Oliver Seraphin will also join us a little later. And also Dr. Dion George is with us. So as usual, we discuss the good, the bad, the ugly, and the dangerous with inputs from callers, from relatives, from friends, from brothers and sisters at home and abroad. And we do all of this with no malice, no anger, no personal attacks, no vilification, no divisiveness. All we want to do is to just bring back the civility, a caring society, good governance, peace and love among our Kalinago brothers and sisters, and Caribbean, Afro-Caribbean brothers and sisters, and friends of Dominica at home and abroad. So wherever you are in Dominica, in the region and globally, please join this conversation on the Global View on Q and have your say, as you do every Tuesday, with me, Mr. G, and my distinguished guests, only on Q95, the big station. So let's just do a huge shout out with hugs and much love and appreciation and a big thank you to our healthcare providers and frontline workers doing their best to keep us safe from this deadly coronavirus and its new variants, often working under very, very difficult conditions. So we ask that you always follow the correct advice, the guidelines and protocols, play it safe and stay alive. So happy to have you with us tonight. We welcome and embrace you wherever you are in every community in Dominica, in the region, and in the global community. As usual, our engineer Sheridan Norris is keeping us on air, and Lambert Lambi Charles is on the console at Q95 directing the traffic as usual. He'll take your calls and he'll direct them to us. I hope you're doing well, Lambi. So now let's get started. I just go over first to Dr. Irving Andre to get the conversation started on the situation developing during the periods just before and during the era of former Prime Ministers Patrick Rowland John and Oliver J. Seraphin. Dr. Andre, I yield the mic to you now.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. G. Let me say a warm welcome and to the fellow panelists, all distinguished persons in their own respective fields, and persons who've shown a great and abiding interest in the future and welfare and well-being and in development of Dominica. I think that augurs very well for the future. Let me again thank you for putting on this program. And let me say good evening to your wonderful listeners and those who are seeking a greater knowledge about their own past, the island's past, hopefully with a view to reinforcing their contribution to Dominica's future. In a sense, the 1970s was a very difficult decade. Dominica was just emerging out of the 60s. In the 60s, there was a great sense of exhilaration. There was a great sense of enthusiasm about Dominica's future. And that is one of the reasons for that is there was a significant boost in Dominica's banana industry. There was a sense that the rising tide of economic fortunes was lifting every family, lifting every boat, so that you had people who otherwise could not have sent their children to secondary school. You had people who otherwise were not considered for scholarships. You had persons who otherwise could not find markets for their goods, who were selling their bananas at different depots, whether that's at a Longhouse in Portsmouth, for example. You have Bedford trucks zooming every fortnight, bringing the green gold to be shipped to England and so on. So you had a great upliftment of Dominica's economy, and you had Dominica's people becoming into their own. Their culture was being focused on by Edward Oliver LeBlanc. The sense of inferiority which many have on account of that fairly rigid class structure in Dominica was being eroded. And again, that augured very well for the future. In the 1970s, however, you had, and Thomson probably can speak to that much better than they can, you had a series of economic reversals. You had a significant increase in gas, if I recall correctly, almost tripling in 1972, 1973. You had a significant amount of youth unemployment. You had the influx or the growing influence, for example, of the Rastafarian culture in Dominica. And with no jobs available or many young persons unemployed, with the growth in a kind of radicalism in Dominica, manifested, for example, by the formation of the movement for the New Dominica, the uprising at schools, whether the St. Mary's Academy, whether it's the Dominica Grammar School, it was a difficult period. Added to that, you had a growing union militancy, starting in the early 70s, with, for example, Daniel Coderall being displaced first from a grammar school and from the DBS. You had the flexing of the muscles of trade unionism in Dominica. And you had the emergence of a leader who took no prisoners, so to speak. And it is within that context that Edward Oliver LeBlanc departed office and decided to retreat to his ancestral home so that he can enjoy the pleasures of private life. And it is within that context that Patrick John emerged. Now, I should indicate that obviously Patrick John came onto the scene, politically speaking, going back to the early 60s. It is fair to say that Patrick John perhaps was one of the biggest populist leader, even surpassing that the leadership of Edward Oliver LeBlanc. He was a very talented fellow, an excellent sports person. He became involved in trade unionism after a short tenure as a teacher at the St. Mary's Academy. He was involved in carnival. He was involved in football. He was involved in cricket. He actually managed the Dominica national football team sometime in the 60s. It is fair to say that in terms of sheer charisma, in terms of a multi-talented individual, very few people could surpass Patrick Roland John. Just give me 1 minute.
Everything's set.
No trouble at all. We'll wait for you. We'll give you a minute to get sorted out. Andre, so.
7:30. All right. Okay. Mr. G, just before 7:30, I have to be excused for the reasons I explained to you.
Yes, you did.
Duty calls. So Patrick brought many things to the table which many other leaders did not bring. But he was unfortunate because he came to the power upon the departure of Edward Oliver during this decade of turbulence. And suffice it to say that in 74, after he became the leader of the Labour Party and obviously Premier of Dominica, there was significant pressures on him, one, to assert his leadership in the face of the impending political strife that was besieging Dominica. As I said, you had the whole question of the radical movement in Dominica. You had the whole question of youth unemployment. You had the growth of what we term in Dominica to be the dread problem. And Patrick John had to deal with these issues head on. And suffice it to say, he managed to deal with these issues head on, obviously in a very controversial piece of legislation called you're known locally as the Dread Act, which was on about November or thereabouts of 1974. And suffice it to say that it is on a law and order platform that he gained ascendancy in April of 1975. But again, Patrick revealed the kind of person he was. Because if you look at some of the policies, some of the initiatives that he took, it certainly clearly established his working class credentials, his interest in trying to uplift, in the very manner that Edward Oliver tried to do the same, the conditions of the laboring population in Dominica. Look at his issues, for example. Look at his emphasis on non-profit housing. You just have to go to Bath Estate, and you will understand what I'm trying to say to you. Again, and that type of housing was significantly and qualitatively different from what obtains now. You had a housing where people could work to own their property. Ownership of property is one of the cornerstones of a fledgling democracy because it imbues you with a sense of purpose, a sense of pride, you see, a sense of wanting to develop your own resources and by extension, wanting to develop your own country. Look at under his tenure, I don't know what the name was called then, but the National Bank, for example, indigenization of the banking system. It's kind of ironic that 40 years after that, today in Dominica, the banking system, quite frankly, is under suspicion in a fashion that Dr. Thomson probably can best explain. So in addition to those initiatives, obviously, the whole question of scholarships, the whole question of a national youth movement, the whole question of roads being built for Dominican produce, the whole question of the emphasis on trying to bring development to every nook and cranny of Dominica. He embraced these populist ideas. And the fact of the matter is, in doing so, he incurred the wrath of those who, quite frankly, were hesitant and reluctant and unaccepting of the type of leadership that he afforded. And to the extent that the politics of the 70s became bitter, it is because of the clash of these two titanic forces. Those seeking to perhaps supplant the Labour Party government and those seeking to maintain the kind of working class philosophy of Edward Oliver LeBlanc. And without going into the details, because that history has been written about, I have written about it and so on. That is what culminated in what happened in May of 1979. The clash of these two titanic forces. None wanted to give way. One exacting or trying or coming up or using every maneuver, every initiative, every device to supplant the Labour Party government. Again, suffice it to say that Patrick, in one interpretation, certainly mine, overreacted to that with the result that May 29th took place and things happened afterwards and so on. But to truly understand the man and to truly understand his policies, you have to look at what he did in the 1970s. You have to look at his focus. He didn't embrace some type of little oligarchy in terms of the creation of wealth. He basically had policies that went beyond some narrow group, some narrow focus group of supporters, of one might say of sycophants. He went well beyond that. And it is fair to say that despite the travails and tribulations of the 1970s, he was still able to do that. He even introduced legislation to preserve some of Dominica's natural forests, you know? So he was a conservationist long before conservationism became popular, for God's sakes. But these are not things that we associate with him. We associate with him other issues and so on. And as I said, I'm not here to paint some rosy picture of Patrick John. Patrick John had his shortcomings like any other leader and so on. But again, the fact of the matter is that he certainly moved the needle forward in terms of the development of Dominica. And I think, unfortunately, in so doing, he incurred a political backlash that, as I said, culminated in this array of forces set against him, and especially after he declared the intention for Dominica to become an independent country. The simple fact of the matter is that there are many sectors or many persons did not appreciate the prospect of Dominica becoming an independent country. Don't forget one thing. In the 1970s, we can't just look at Patrick John. I mean, even if you look at Rosie Douglas, who came back to Dominica on about April 1976, look at the difficulties Rosie faced In fact, I was listening to one of your programs today, Mr. G, and one caller said that even in places like Castle Bruce and La Plaine, Rosie was literally stoned for committing political blasphemy, for being known as a communist, for God's sakes. So that is the context, that is the era in which Patrick John had to contend with the forces of conservatism while trying to steer a middle-of-the-road path of development for Dominica. And suffice it to say that something had to give. These forces came together, they collided violently in 1979, and that significantly transformed the trajectory of Dominica's history. So, in short, Patrick John was a populist leader, cast, in my view, in the mold of Edward Oliver LeBlanc, talented, gifted, a trade unionist, started in the 60s. He, as you know, was an elected member of Roseton Council. He was first elected in 1970 after three close ministers, three powerful ministers of LeBlanc's cabinet, Armenian Ducre, Mabel Meyer, and W.S. Strathmore, after they bolted. And LeBlanc, with his characteristic audacity, instead of trying to bring his troops together, decided to call an election. And LeBlanc summoned three knights in shining armor, Patrick John, what's his name? Christian, Henkel Christian, and one other whose name escapes me. I think it's LeBlanc's brother-in-law, to contest the elections on behalf of the LeBlanc ticket. And that was his foray into public office. It is significant that from 1970 to 1974, Patrick John was the most visible minister in LeBlanc's government. Because during that time, you see LeBlanc retreating from public office. His wife had gone back to vacaz. He had grown disillusioned at the snipes, at the treatment he faced from the establishment in Roseau. And it was Patrick John he emerged. It was Patrick John who supplanted R.O.P. Armour. And it was Patrick John he became triumphant when they had to replace a leader in the summer of 1974. So, in short, as a brief summary, we have to look at the emergence of Patrick John within that difficult period. And I think any assessment of Patrick has to occur within the context of a decade which was very difficult on all fields: the economic, the political, and quite frankly, the whole question of radicalism. And the mere fact that he emerged triumphant, and the mere fact that he was able to successfully run in 1975, the mere fact that he was able to persist until 1979 is in fact a testimony of his own resilience. But we can appreciate him a little better today, because during that time, as I said, there was no rampant or obsessive acquisition of private assets, whether by himself or by any member of his inner circle. And that is a telling compliment to him, because, as I said, we can appreciate the significance of that now, even better today, when we have to assess what obtained in his era, and we have to compare it with what obtains right now. So, Mr. G, that is my brief introduction. As I indicated to you, I have to check on something, and I'm going to take my leave. If we finish early, I'll come back and join.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Andre. I know that you had this matter, very important matter that you had to deal with, but I'm very sure that once you get through, I'm sure you'll probably rejoin us, because I know there's a lot more that you can.
I definitely would like, but I'll get back to you if I can shut this thing off. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. So, what I'd really like to do, really, I mean, short of thanking Dr. Andre Justice Andre for this remarkable introduction, I thought maybe I said I was going to go over to Dion, but Thomson, I'd like to go over to you. I'm not sure whether you're hearing us in real time, or whether you have to listen to us on Facebook. So if you are getting us through Facebook, it means that it may take a minute for you to realize that I'm trying to introduce. But I really want to. Yes. So what I want to do is to essentially bring you to continue from where Dr. Andre just thought, because he had to leave, in terms of the history of what was happening during PG trade. He spoke about the level of conservatism that he had to face. And he spoke about all the challenges that he had to face from certain classes in certain parts of the country. But then, in the face of all of those challenges and difficulties, still managed to do a lot of stuff like build schools and roads and create a lot of development in the economy and housing and so on. So let me just go over to you, Thomson, so you can take it from there and give us a little bit more. And I really hope that maybe not now, but later on, I'm really hoping that you can come back and talk to us about that IMF report. I don't know what is going on with this at this time. So maybe you later on, I'm really hoping that you can come back and talk to us about that IMF report. I don't know what is going on with this.
Yes, indeed, Sheridan. Thank you very much, and let me say good evening to your listeners. I still have to listen via Facebook, but let me take up from where Dr. Andrew left off, and let me just say a very good evening. I see our Prime Minister Seraphin. Let me say good evening to you, Honorable, as well as Dion, and of course Lambi. It's good to have you guys. Good to be on the panel again tonight. You know, one of the things that is hard to reconcile is that the reign of Patrick John lasted as Prime Minister just about 4 years. You know, when you think of the impact that he had on Dominica politics, it was truly amazing. One of the things that I wanted to draw attention to was the fact that he was able to convince the British government to side with him in terms of what his vision for Dominica. At the time, Patrick Johnny was pushing having the system we have in place now, which is the 21 elected members and 9 nominated, 5 by the government, 4 by the opposition. You may recall that the opposition at the time, they were pushing for a different system. They wanted to get independence, but with a system where there would be a president that would be elected and a 13-member assembly that would also be elected, and 9 others would be appointed based on the proportional representation. So at the end of the day, he was able to sway that conversation along their lines. Also, I know that since Barbados got its independence in 1966, after Grenada got theirs in 1974, Dominica was really the first outside of Grenada, one of the to get independence, ahead of Antigua, ahead of St. Kitts, ahead of St. Lucia and St. Vincent. So that, I think, is something, you know, which kind of brings out what was going on at the time. And in terms of the challenges he had, when you think about it, there was an oil crisis that had, as Andre indicated, caused the prices to rise. At the same time, Dominica was fighting the leaf spot disease. You may recall that in the leaf spot started around 77, 78, where it really had a devastating impact on the economy. And Patrick John had to kind of work his way through all of this, while at the same time facing tremendous opposition, a very militant opposition at the time, led by Mary Eugenia Charles of the Dominica Freedom Party. But you had the issue of the dreads. You had the issue of a change in society. I mean, Dominica in the 1970s was a society on the verge of change. And it was a very challenging time for him. He was fairly young when he assumed the prime ministership at 36 at the time. But it showed that he probably all of those pressures would have made him look for opportunities. So, for example, we saw his dalliance with Sidney Burnett Alleyne. In exchange, we are told for Alleyne helping with the invasion of Barbados, that he would contribute monies, a certain amount of money to the Dominican Treasury. Later on, we saw the pact that he made with Don Pearson, you know, the idea that to build an international airport at Point Round, you know, different things that he was trying, which in hindsight, you know, we've had a chance to look back at what it was. Probably it was not well thought out, but I think he had this naivety, he had this the sense that he could get things done on behalf of Dominica. He had very little to work with, precious little to work with. But I said the economy was under tremendous strain. Unemployment was rising. An increasing number of youth were turning away from society with the onslaught of the dreads and so on. So it was a very difficult and challenging time. And his actions, which we have judged very harshly in hindsight, certainly was not the best in terms of what he did. But at the same time, as you rightly pointed out, Mr. G, during those very tumultuous times of just the 4 short years, not only did they get independence, but he also pushed forward the programs of road building and also trying to develop the little man. He was very much concerned about increasing the lot of the average Dominican. That, to me, more than anything else, if we were to assign the legacy of Patrick John, is the fact that he fought hard. He fought for the little man, the persons, the thousands and thousands of Dominicans who were part of the peasantry, who had supported them, how we strive to improve the education system, improve the road network, create job opportunities. And at the same time, without being corrupt, one could argue that in all of this, even with his alliance with Sidney Bernard Alleyne and Don Pearson and the other things that he did during that time, it was not to gain personal wealth, but it was on behalf of the country. I mean, he went about it in a way which probably was not the correct way, and rightly so, he met with opposition. But it was not about self, it was not about person compared, for example, to what we have today. It was about the development of the country. It was about pushing the country forward.
Yes, Thomson, if you're gonna take a pause there, I really wanted to. I did not want to bring in to introduce former Prime Minister Oliver Seraphin at this time, but really I feel that because you've raised all of those things about the Patrick John era, I mean, we cannot really pretend that this former prime minister called Oliver J. Seraphin, he was part and parcel of that cabinet. He was part of that government. I'm pretty sure that when PJ was going to England, he was with him there when they went to independence. He had some very important ministries. He had very important ministries in PJ's, in the government, in Edward Lebland's government, I imagine, and in PJ's time mostly. But certainly he would be able to help us with a lot of those things that were accomplished when Patrick John was Premier and Prime Minister, and when he himself, former Prime Minister Oliver Seraphin, later became Prime Minister, but he was a minister at that time. So maybe former Prime Minister Oliver Seraphin, I was hoping to hide you a little bit for later when we come to talk about your era, but I really would like you to add some, if you can turn on your mic, I'd really like you to add some meat and some flesh to what Dr. Andre has already said and what Dr. Fontaine has added to that, because I myself, as you know, lived through that Patrick John era, and I too can be a testimony and be a witness to some of what was accomplished there. And we all know that a very good friend, Simeon Joseph, will be joining us later. He knows a lot about Patrick John in a very personal kind of way, and he will help us with some of that. All of that I'm saying, former Prime Minister Seraphin, is to explain to our audience, especially the young people, when I say young people, people 40 and under, who really don't know anything about the Patrick John era or Edward Lebland's era or Frank Barron's era or Oliver Seraphin's era. All they know about is the Roosevelt Skerritt era for the last 20 years. And so help us, if you can, to give us some indication of the activities that were taking place in manufacturing and in education, in all this, in housing, in road building and bridges, and share with us some of that. Mr. Seraphin, I yield the mic to you now. You need to open your mic because your mic is muted, so I hope you can get that sorted out so we can hear you. If you're not able to, yes, I think I heard you now. I think you came on for a minute and you went back off, so we're not hearing you. So we need to sort out your mic. So maybe what I might do is, since your mic is not yet sorted, I may go over to, and I just want to also
Would you
welcome.
try now and see if it's on?
Oh, you sound very powerful now, as usual. Now you sound like your usual self. So go right ahead, OJ.
Yeah, Sheridan, it's a pleasure.
I want to just welcome Simeon Joseph as well, who has just joined us.
Yeah.
OJ, I yield to you,
Yeah.
OJ.
Yeah, it's a pleasure being in your program and with you. We've come a long way. The areas where we grew up in Shillingford Crescent is an example of another form of development which came from Frank Barron, which is the idea of having people to work on a self-help basis and to build homes, from the self-help aided program. And so we come from that, and I'm sure that this will come in as part of a discussion that would impact upon ideas and vision for housing development in Dominica, which could allow for more people to participate and enjoy based upon they getting into the KUDMA system and to share, as it were, the resources that they have to build homes that, in fact, became very useful at a time when the persons who were involved in that, including yourself and my father, your father and myself, fathers, also had issues where they had some financial difficulties, but were able to get a home under the self-help aided program. In fact, by pure joy, really, I was introduced by E.O. Leblanc in 1970 as the chairman of the Central Housing and Planning Authority. And later on, I became Minister of Housing under the Patrick John administration. And then when there was an issue with Michael Douglas at the Ministry of Communication and Routes, which he was moved to after being taken from the Ministry of Agriculture, I realized that Patrick wanted me to continue remaining on the forefront of the building of the homes for the less fortunate, and I was made the chairman of the Housing Corporation. So in fact, I was in housing for a period from 1970 to 1980, so 10 years of that. And there came about this development of housing in Bath Estate, housing in Canefield. And prior to that, as the chairman of the Central Housing and Planning Authority, we had built houses in Kings Hill and Point Michelle, as well as Marigat. So there was, in fact, a very dynamic effort towards housing development. In fact, when I became Prime Minister, I had negotiated very successfully to have houses built through the Royal Bank financing project. And that particularly was very strong. That's the housing. If you're going up to Trafalgar on the right-hand side, going towards the river, you will see those houses, which people don't talk about. But that was a very successful housing effort by my administration at the time. And we also had a number of houses that were constructed through the Seventh-day Adventist World Service Program. That's the SOURCE project for houses all over Dominica. There was an unfortunate situation when if I'm to stick on housing for a little while, there was an unfortunate situation where we were able to negotiate, my government negotiated for houses out of France under the SOURCE, under the financial arrangement with the government of France through Bankworms. And those houses arrived in Dominica, complete homes with even toilets and bathrooms, etc. And the incoming administration chose not to use those houses and left them in containers. Well, I was very unfortunate, except for one or two that was built at the Botanical Gardens. I see my dear friend making mention here of the leaf spot that we suffered from. And as Minister of Agriculture, that was my area of concern for the agricultural department. And I recall having to be using helicopters to go around looking at the various fields that were being affected by this. And we were then able to come up with an idea of having aerial spraying and getting assistance and so on to get that done. In the event that we have to look back at the airport construction, I would like to also mention that Sidney Burnett Arlene was not only interested, and I was directly involved and associated with the efforts by Sidney Burnett Arlene to involve himself in airport development, the international airport at Woodford Hill, and we had in fact acquired lands there for that purpose. And Sidney Burnett Arlene was due to have received, in fact, he prepared through some British engineers a document which would indicate the facilities that could be built and the feasibility of an international airport at that place in Woodford Hill with his assistance. And also he is a very colorful personality, which we would have to spend some other occasion to examine Sidney Burnett Arlene. But he was involved with the Rhodesian crisis, the South African desire for freedom, for change. And he then was very fortunate to have raised a huge amount of capital out of those opportunities that was given to him. And he created the Sydney, the Mercantile Bank in Barbados. And because he's of Dominican origin, the Pottersville, he was a part of the Potters family, which Pottersville was named after. And then he felt a commitment to assisting Dominica. And there's a story about it, which will take too long to talk about. But the bottom line was that he was making funds available through the gold that he had stored in his bank. And an arrangement has been made with the Barbados government to release that gold so he could use it as bullion against getting funds for the international airport. And that came to an unfortunate demise. In the business of Don Pearson, this is one area that I had unfortunately, an issue with the premier, I think he was at the time, Patrick John, where Don Pearson came in and had an idea of doing a free zone, which is 47 square miles. The concern that I had was because of the method it was done. I was able to have received that information from my permanent secretary, Eardley Castor, one Friday evening, that there was a matter of information given to the public from the New Chronicle, or the Dominica Chronicle at the time, that we had engaged into a 47 square mile deal with Don Pearson. And the details of that deal really was, to a very large extent, to have been associated with the Ministry of Agriculture, which I was the minister. And I found it unfortunate that a decision was being made which my ministry was not involved with. And I called a meeting with persons who had the capacity to look into the matter, which included the Mr. Robinson of the Lands and Surveys and the person in charge of the Forestry Department, as well as the Ministry of Agriculture, Agricultural Division. And we discovered that there were several issues that were of consequence that we had to examine. And one of which was that there was $1 a year to be paid by this gentleman, Don Pearson. And consequently, the lands were to a large extent owned by the Armours, the Douglases, and so on, down in the north. And so it would have been a difficult situation where how would you pay now for the land, etc. And so there's a lot of concerns about it, which was raised by me at the cabinet as the minister responsible for agriculture. I must then make the point here that the government that Patrick led had with it the understanding that ministers were being given areas of responsibility under the Constitution, and that such responsibility meant that it is not a, how would I put it, a dictatorship, that all ministers have a right to be responsible for their ministry. And as such, there was a demand being made that we do this, get the feedback from our various technical staff members to give a contribution to any decision. So that was one area where we did have some problems in terms of the internal working of the cabinet as it pertains to that Don Pearson matter. On reflection, one can revisit and say, had it been better for Don Pearson to have offered an arrangement in a contract that would have allowed for the St. Martin style duty free type, a place where, persons could really come in and do business in the country in a zone that is duty free oriented, a la St. Martin. That could have been useful, but it didn't work out that way because Pearson pointed out that it is because of the situation of having a security, contract for that area, as well as the other benefits that he wanted to use to be impactful in selling the project to his investors. So we had a problem there. But then Patrick John really was someone who understood the principle of loyalty, and then he was very, very convinced that despite the fact that his Attorney General, Lee Austin, was becoming a problem in that there were several issues that came up with some land that he had, there was wrong information given to the Treasury, and there were other things that happened, which at the end of the day made him unpopular within, that is, the Attorney General unpopular in the cabinet, and Patrick stuck by him. And the end result was what happened in the 29th of May, and therefore, he had some problems in guaranteeing his existence as the leader based upon the fact that he stood up for Lee Austin. So these were the things that were problematical. But then we look at the airport.
Yeah, but OJ, let me just interject here a second, because I know you're going to come back because we have a lot to get from
Right.
you of your era as Prime Minister.
Right.
Right now, I want to bring the conversation back a lot more about PJ.
Right.
His time in there, his life, his leadership,
Right.
his Dr. Justice Irving Andre, just for Simeon's benefit, we started off with Justice Dr. Irving Andre, and he sort of introduced us to that period, and he looked at the challenges that PJ faced in the early days, the conservatism that was around. I mean, the opposition they had, everything he tried to do, but in the face of all his challenges, he was still able to perform and to get a lot of results. And we started talking about some of those results. This is where you can come in and fill in a lot of those blanks, Simeon. You knew the man very well. And Irving Andre made the point that whatever you say about Patrick, whatever he did not do it for self. He did it because he was trying to help people. He may have made some mistakes, but the mistakes he made was in trying to help other people. And so he was maybe a little bit overzealous and over enthusiastic, and maybe he may not have done everything as OJ said, the precise textbook way, but his heart was in the right place. This man, I can say something about him too. I was around in the era when he was there. He really was out for people. That is why I want you to come in now. Tell us about something, a little bit about the man, Simeon, and about his times and some of the accomplishments that you were aware of, because Irving Andre started talking. Although he had all these challenges, all his opposition, he was still able to build schools and build roads and do a lot of things in economic development and houses. So let's talk to us about the man PJ, Simeon. And your mic is off, huh? You need to turn on your mic.
Okay, well, good evening. Apologies for being late, but I told you I had a previous lecture.
You did.
So good evening to Dr. George, and Thomson, it's good to see you. Still alive and kicking and safe and sound and there with us, and former PM OJ and the rest, etc. Well, you see, I have always referred to Patrick John as that kind of enigma, in the sense that Patrick John was somebody who was very loved and very disliked, and for various reasons. Now, one of the sad realities I would say about Patrick John is that, and I began to I saw it even more after I delivered the eulogy. There are a lot of revealing insights that were confirmed to me after I delivered the eulogy. But one of the things I'd like to say is there is the myth about Patrick John, and there is the man Patrick John himself. Okay, And you speak about his accomplishments, and you speak about who he was. One of the unfortunate things I think about the man Patrick John is the fact that too many people seem to have defined him for what he was not, or got to know him based on a narrative that was defined by others. And you're quite right. I mean, when I joined this program, I tonight I heard you mentioning about all the ministries he held. It's amazing that I think Patrick must have held 4 or 5 ministries before he ascended to the position of prime minister. His first ministry was Ministry of Education, which of course he held for a day. Okay, and why he held that position for a day is because when he was appointed Minister of Education by Mr. Libla on winning the election in 1970, there were some people in Roseau who went to Mr. Libla and opposed Patrick being Minister of Education. So then we know he went on to Minister of Communications and Works, Minister of Finance, Minister of Agriculture, Minister of Home Affairs between 1970 and 1975. Now, I had the occasion to, at one time, to speak to Mr. Libla about that, and I'll tell you why. Because there was the notion going around as positioned by some historians and by many persons that Patrick eked his way into the leadership of the Labour Party. So I had the opportunity to question Mr. Libla directly on that myself, because of course Mr. Libla, being my mother's second cousin and a very good friend of my father, I would often visit him in Vekas many times, especially when my father would go, and I enjoyed the opportunity to go and visit him. As a matter of fact, on one occasion when Mr. Libla called my father to Vekas, and he said, "Sylvester, I would like you to do my eulogy when I die." Of course, my father died before Mr. Libla. And I had the opportunity to sit in detail as my father was making copious notes about Mr. Libla on his leadership and certain things. So I directly asked him. I said, "Mr. Libla, but I want to ask you 2 questions directly. Um, is it true that Patrick eked his way to the leadership of the party? And who would you have loved to be the leader of the party? Because there is this narrative that he wanted Mr. R.O.P. Amor. And Mr. Libla's words are stirring to me to this day. He said, "Never happened. Nothing could be further from the truth." I saw in Patrick John a young man who had the charisma and the leadership qualities to take over the Dominican Labour Party, because the Labour Party is the party of the poor man, and Patrick was born into poverty, and therefore he should be the. And so I said, "But did you really want?" He said, "No, he never wanted Mr. Libla, Mr. Amo. The bourgeois elite of Roseau and a certain sector of the population of Dominica wanted Mr. Libla because they felt he was more of, what do you call it, a worthy class to be premier of Dominica."
I
And
mean,
that was,
you wanted Ronald Amo, you mean?
they wanted Ronald Amo, yes, Ronald Amo instead of Patrick John to be. And Mr. Libla said nothing could be further from the truth. So that is a giveaway, a takeaway that I've gotten from Mr. Libla, and to put that narrative to rest, which is why I had to put it. But apart from that, you see, it is amazing to see that between Patrick's short tenure in office from 1974 to 1979, the number of accomplishments that he was able to achieve in that short stint. Now, it is remarkable that he was able to achieve those things in a very tumultuous period. There are a number of situations which one is aware of, and having spoken to Patrick myself on many occasions about that. Let us face it, his cabinet was not as stable as we would like it to think, okay? Because he was always aware of some undermining goings on around him in his party, which he shared with me on many occasions. But apart from that, I think he was able to manage that quite well, because he was never in any public fracas with his ministers, except when, of course, he had to dismiss, I think, Ferdinand Parilo and Mike Douglas, and also when he had to, I think, had a cabinet reshuffle at the time, so that's it. But that's it. And so, but I think, and Mr. Seraphin can perhaps speak about that more. I had the opportunity to speak with like Vic Riviere, H.L. Christian, who was also, and they said that within the cabinet of Dominica, Patrick was maybe one of the most democratic persons in the cabinet. Now, Mr. Seraphin is there, so he's better able to speak at that than me. I was never at a cabinet meeting. Granted, I used to attend a lot of Labour Party going on, so I saw a lot of the dynamics of the Labour Party at the time, and I saw Patrick often, in dialogue and consultation and face sometimes arguments with members of his own party. I'm not sure if Mr. Seraphin can remember a famous meeting we had at the Housing Development Corporation one afternoon regarding certain things of the Labour Party. I'm not sure if you can remember that one. But nonetheless, in spite of that one, he faced fierce opposition from the trade unions in Dominica, a betrayal, of course, by some members of the unions. He had the Chronicle as the Star and other media outlets as his second opposition. He had the Civil Service Association, which was the de facto opposition and the second in command to the Dominica Freedom Party. And he had the Freedom Party and a whole set of other opposing forces against him. What is remarkable is that in spite of all of this, Patrick was able to steady the course and achieve a number of accomplishments for Dominica. The Baphomet housing scheme, the daring attempt of the Kingsfield establishment of the Kingsfield Airport, the initial renovation of the Melville Hall Airport, the construction of a number of schools, the strengthening of the local government department, the establishment of the National Bank of Dominica, when people were told this was supposed to be a Quapo bank, and Dominicans were told that they must not put their money in the Quapo bank. The upgrading of DBS Radio Dominica to the Dominica Broadcasting Corporation, the establishment of the National, Housing Corporation, which was responsible for the construction of so many houses around the island, the commencement of the building of feeder roads, the expansion of electricity and water, and all those sorts of the strengthening of the local government movement. And never before in the history of Dominica had there been a strengthening of the local government movement in Dominica than under Patrick John. That was a time when there was a rise in the empowerment of the governance of villages and in the village councils. And there's lots more. The fisheries cooperative, the establishment of Dominica, I think is under Oliver Seraphin, when the Mont Papiton National Park was designated as a national park. All those sorts of things there. And he did it under much opposition. He had a public service that was fiercely against him, and I said on all the opposing forces. And of course, there's no doubt, knowing Patrick, he had his own little demons to battle with as well, as a person and as a politician. But I think these are some of the accomplishments. But I think one of Patrick's greatest accomplishments, I would say, would be his ability outside of politics, as a human being, as a man, to be magnanimous, to be forgiving. Patrick wasn't somebody who held any grudges, and to be somebody who was able to reach out to his opponents and be able to dialogue for the resolution of certain matters. Look, the whole situation of and again, Mr. Seraphin can speak to that, the Dread Act, the whole situation of the Dreads, when we remember when that was coming to the fore and how he approached it. Now look at the expansion of the manufacturing sector, Mr. Gregoire. I'm not sure if you remember, in 1978, we had this national trade fair, which was located in the St. Martin's Secondary School, the St. Mary's Academy, the Dominican Grammar School, 3 campuses, where the local manufacturers of Dominica and the farmers were able to bring to the fore the production. There was a rising production in Dominica as Patrick sought to empower local entrepreneurship. It wasn't something where he felt the government had to have a hold on everything that was happening and those sorts of things there. So I think in 4.5 years, I would just like to say that some time ago there was this saying, first time, never before, But I would like to say, contrary to that notion, when we go back to 1974 to 1979, one can comfortably say that in the history of the development of Dominica, when you look at the establishment of institutions, when you look at the building of certain edifices, when you look at the transformation of certain social things, and I remember, Mr. Seraphin again can remember that in the vote of no confidence motion in the House of Assembly, put forward by Eugenia Charles in June 1977, Oliver Seraphin, that is where I admired him, was able to present to the Dominican people the manifesto, the 1970, if we go back to the Hansards, that is the time when debates used to go at 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night. Oliver Seraphin was able to present to the Dominican people the accomplishments of the Dominican Labour Party in the 1975 manifesto. And by 1977, just 3.5 years after coming into power, the Dominican Labour Party under PJ was able to accomplish over 80% of the items in that manifesto, okay, to include a number of things. So I think that was a very accomplished thing that Patrick was able to do. And there's lots more that can be said about Patrick John, but we will at least yield the floor to other persons.
Yes, and thank you for that. I want to, before I go back to former Prime Minister O.J. Seraphin, I wanted to also note, Simeon, that I want to go over to Dr. Dion George first, because I want him to put on his political scientist hat and do something, because of all of what you've said, all of what Dr. Irving Andre said, all of what former Prime Minister Seraphin has said. This should allow Dr. Thomson Fontaine, Dr. Dion George an opportunity to be able to analyze all of what was going on and compare, because you see, in that era, Patrick John did not have the largest of money. You know. I mean, the budget, what was the budget? Oliver Seraphin will tell us what was the annual budget every year when they went to the parliament. He will also tell us how often the parliament met to discuss the people's business. Understand, today, parliament hardly ever meets to discuss the people's business. The cabinet seems to be taking all the decisions. But I wanted to do some comparison of what was happening then in terms of the society, in terms of the economy, in terms of the politics, because I did not seem to recall the level of divisiveness that we have today. I don't seem to recall the level of fear that we have today. People are afraid to speak, even when their own personal interest is at stake. People are just afraid to speak. They're just fearful. I did not see that happening in the days of Patrick John and Oliver Seraphin. I did not see that at all. So I just want to also note, as you mentioned the trade show, Simeon, in that year, Patrick John, the government of Patrick, gave the Garment Manufacturers Cooperative $50,000 to assist with that trade show. Now, if you look at $50,000 in 1978 or thereabouts, and come down to the present value of that money today, it's a lot of money. For you to accomplish the same thing that we did, you'd have to put out a lot of money. So in those days, $50,000 was a large sum of money. But Patrick John had the foresight, and he had the interest, because he understood what was happening. He saw jobs, he saw exports, he saw productivity, he saw people engaged and improving their wealth, improving their personal well-being, and their quality of life. That is what he saw. So when we went to Patrick John from the Garment Manufacturers Cooperative, he gave us money. When Oliver Seraphin comes to talk later, he's going to give us a lot more detail. But Dion George, I wanted to give you a moment, and then I want to go to Thomson too, so we can do an analysis of those things briefly, those periods there, what happened there.
Okay, good evening, Mr. Gregoire, and to my other distinguished panelists. Of course, I want to thank you very much, sir, for hosting such a program, a legacy of the leaders of Dominica. I mean, starting from Premier Edward LeBlanc and Premier Patrick John, then Prime Minister Patrick John, our good friend here, interim Prime Minister, Honorable O.J. Seraphin, up to Madam Dame Mary Eugenia Charles, Edison James, Roosevelt Douglas, Pierre Charles, and Roosevelt Scarry, right? So that's something that I really think that it's a good activity academically, and I think it can also help us to conceptualize where we are, where we have been, and of course, what is most important, where we are going. With that being said, I think tonight's emphasis is on Patrick John and, of course, our friend, Honorable O.J. Seraphin. And, of course, the historians did an excellent job with the in-depth analysis and history of the era. So I won't spend too much time on that. But as you suggested, I will just talk on some highlights some highlights of what I recall, and try to compare it to today's administration and some of the things that I would hope that we want for our country. Incidentally, before I go forward, I would like to invite the Holy Spirit in our discussion, that it gives us grace and blessings, that of course that whatever we do would be beneficial to our country and to one another.
Amen.
Yeah, indeed. Absolutely. I also, because this is a good thing, I want to recall the Convent High School. I think last week they celebrated their 164th anniversary. And kudos to the Convent High School. Actually, that was my first job. My first job at 18 years old, I taught an all female high school. Very interesting experience. But that aside, where Patrick John is concerned, there are just three things I think I would like to touch on. Interestingly, I did not hear any of the historians mention it, but I think it's important to mention because it's part of his history, part of his legacy, right? The first thing, of course, is the Defense Force and the Dread Act, and of course, independence. I mean, one cannot speak about Patrick John without mentioning the fact that he, of course, led Dominica to independence. And interestingly, the declaration of such independence was in my own constituency of Salisbury. And one of the, I would say, not quagmire, but enigma, according to how Simeon Joseph put it, is the Dread Act. I spoke to someone recently, and unfortunately, when Patrick John passed away, some folks said it's very sad that he has been tarnished with looking at his bad side, but he did so much good for Dominica. And then somebody told me, when they think of the Dread Act, it was like a thorn removed from their flesh. I thought that was very insensitive. But interestingly, Dominica was not the only place that had the Dread Act. I mean, Jamaica instituted the Dread Act. But nonetheless, there are other things I think that can mention, and not hear any of the historians mention it. It's something called Operation Red Dog. I'm not sure why the US like to call activities operation. For example, there is something called Operation Bootstrap. Operation Bootstrap is something that has to do with Puerto Rico and industrialization. But Operation Red Dog actually was a code name in 1981 for a military filibuster plot by the Canadian and the American citizens, largely affiliated, of course, as we know, with a white supremacist group. And the whole idea was to kind of got Patrick John back into power. Now, there are those who said that was not proven, but of course, these things were some of the things that characterize his prime ministership. And I just thought it was worth mentioning. Indeed, right here with us tonight, good evening, sir, Honorable O.J. Seraphin. I won't spend much time on it because, of course, he's here to speak for himself. But I thought it was really interesting, and I thought that very appealing to me that even when he ran for election, he went up in my constituency of Salisbury, and I thought that was really interesting. Also, he was very popular in Salisbury, believe it or not, very, very popular. In fact, I understood that a lot of the drains that were built in the village was in the short interim time was under his administration and so forth. Of course, he can speak to it, but he lost that election, and maybe he can explain some of the intricacies that happened during that time. But so as we speak about the legacies of our prime ministers and our premiers, it dawned to my attention that we need to keep this democracy going. And one of the things Mr. Gregoire would like to focus on tonight is something that has been raised on this program before, which is campaign finance reform and electoral reform as a means of keeping this democracy going. For one, from the observation I heard from Dr. Thomson, Fontaine, and from Justice Dr. Andre, and even Mr. O.J. Seraphin himself, it seems to me, after the hurricane in 1979, and even when the former Prime Minister spoke, talking about the housing projects, it seems to me it was a national development project. it seems to me there was little callers involved and very little nepotism. And so, if we are talking about building a nation, I suspect these are some of the values that one would want to have in our administration. So, when we talk about elections, of course, we hear about corruption and the elections are not fair. And person says, well, how can it be fixed? And some people say, well, what is campaign finance reform? Why is it so important? All these guys are doing, they're talking on the radio, but what it's about. And I think it's a learning moment, a catechism moment to talk about campaign finance reform shortly. I think campaign finance reform is basically just refining the rules of how parties raise money during an election, and the purpose of which is to make elections freer and fairer. Now, I will say that generally, most enlightened public folks are very satisfied with campaign finance reform because, quite frankly, it does not benefit or disadvantage any particular political party. But what it does do, however, it removes big money from election. And what I mean by that in a practical sense, for example, in the case of Dominica, say, for example, you have a particular investor who may be contributing to the country, but does so by contributing to a particular political party, then what happens, sometimes intentionally or by default, that they are able to dictate who gets projects, who gets contracts, and so forth. And by so doing, what one happens is you find that your country is perhaps not by governance, but by the word power. By power, some other foreign investment is dictating what happens in the country. And so some people say, okay, campaign finance reform, but in a practical way, give me a model, give me some specificity as to what you mean by that. Well, indeed, I have heard several times, and we on this program have mentioned the Jamaican model. And specifically, I'll just touch on two important aspects of it. One is the purpose of it. And the purpose basically is to make sure that all political parties can give an account of how much money they have raised for a political purpose. Even here in the state of Georgia, they are going to have the governor election. And right now, I think they're saying that the incumbent has raised X amount of $1 million, and some of the challengers have raised X amount of dollars, and they have disclosed all where these monies are coming from. And so in that case, it's a more balanced sort of competition. Another thing is that they should also promote the whole idea that citizens should be part of the electoral process by being able to freely participate and not being bribed into niceties, finance, or handouts, but that they should freely participate. That's what it means to be free. Not necessarily that one has to pay to vote or pay to participate, but also the idea that one must not be coerced in participating, right? And so another thing I think I would touch on as we talk about the legacy of our leaders and how important it is that we continue to build this democracy is the whole idea of keeping our elections fair and having an independent electoral commission. And on that note, what I would say quite poignantly is, as it is right now, I personally and professionally do not feel it is balanced to have, for example, 3 persons on the government side and 2 persons on the opposition side, even if they have not overtly identified their political affiliations. But I would have suggest, and I can say quite definitively, that perhaps there should be more persons involved, including civic organizations like religious organizations, perhaps the legal fraternity as well, civic groups, and yes, members of either political party sides. But in that case, what it would do, in effect, it would dilute the weightiness of the incumbent. It would dilute the weightiness of the incumbent, and it would make it much freer. And the other point I think I would like to mention, of course, is the fact that the opposition parties themselves must not feel despondent. As a political scientist, I want to always encourage competition in the electoral arena. And even if one party has more resources, it doesn't mean that the opposition is dead weight. Some of the things that they can do, for example, to help themselves and to facilitate a freer and fairer election, is that they can appeal to foreign governments with intelligence, if they have such intelligence, of persons perhaps who travel to vote. Perhaps those folks voted in the United States and then still came and voted in Dominica, that they can share that with the intelligence with that government. That's one of the things that they can do. I also felt that they can foster. It might not pass in Parliament, but of course they can use other means to push the whole idea of constitutional reform with the whole idea of residency. I mean, I listened to QFM recently, and I heard the question came up about the possibility of citizens voting, citizens who are not natural born citizens.
I wanted to, Dr. Dion George, if you don't mind, I wanted to sort of interject a little bit, because I really want to come back to you later on when we come back and to talk about all those issues, because you see, we have to talk about all of those things that you're talking about, because I mean, we've had elections before in the past, during Frank Barron's time, during during Lee Blunt's time, during PJ's time, but we never had those real issues because you didn't have this kind of largesse and so on, and the constitution was always the same. But you see, you had these different people in there, people who respected the constitution and the rule of law, and so on, went about doing this in a proper way. So it did not place any kind of disadvantage or put people so much at loggerheads with each other and not providing accountability and transparency in the use of money and where it's coming from. We'll come back to that a little later, but tonight we're talking about Patrick John, and I'm glad that you started doing this analysis. And I want to go over to Dr. Thomson Fontaine briefly before I go over to Prime Minister Oliver Seraphin, because when we do the comparison, one of the things that came on here tonight is that Patrick, I think it may have been Simeon who mentioned it, and you may have mentioned it, and Dr. George as well. The question is, when this man was doing things, he may have made some errors, but he was doing it with national development in mind, not personal development of self-aggrandizement or trying to accumulate wealth for himself and his friends, right? So the question of nepotism did not arise. The question of saying, okay, because you're red or you're black or you're blue or whatever it is, child of house, that did not arise. So this, to my mind, is the kind of analysis I want to do, the comparison, what we had then, what we have now. And in fact, when we talk about housing, I mean, Simeon and Oliver Seraphin told us about all these houses that were built by Patrick John. Everybody got the titles. Today, people are getting houses and they're not sure if they'll ever have a title. These are the kind of comparisons that I'm talking about. In terms of legacy, you know, so we have to talk, when we talk about Patrick John's legacy, we can talk about all these houses that Bathurst did, and that Oliver Seraphin spoke about. People got their titles, expanded their homes, they live in well, but they paid for them. They worked and paid for those houses. When Oliver Seraphin and our fathers, they got the houses down on Shillingford Crescent, just by the public works garage. We had to work. We carried buckets of cement. It was good, man. We carried for self-help. We worked. We put out, and then we put our names in a hat and pull out a number, and whatever number you pull out, that's the house you get. But the point is, you had to pay for your house, although you provided labor, you still had to pay. But because we provided labor, the cost of the house was low, and then you felt a certain amount of pride in knowing that you built your own house. This is the kind of thing that happened to the society. So Dr. Thomson Fontaine I wanted to go back to you. I know it's going to take you a minute to hear me and to come on because you're doing through Facebook. I want to come to you so that you can see what is going on, what is happening
Yes,
now, and of course,
yes, sure.
I want you to also touch on the whole
Sure.
question of the recent IMF report because it tells
You
you
know, Sheridan, indeed, I think it's a point that needs to be made, and I'm glad you made it. And I would like to re-emphasize this point. And I think I said it earlier on. One of the things that really strikes me about the leadership of Patrick John, Prime Minister Patrick John, was his caring about the ordinary person. He genuinely cared about the people of Dominica. He genuinely cared about building and developing. He was the man for the little man. He was the little man for the little man, and that is something that, in terms of legacy, you can see it in the way the apartments that were built, as you said, and people had ownership. People could start from small and build on it. They were not also given handouts. They valued the hard work. They valued industry. And that is something that I think under this current administration we have lost, because we see a prime minister who has viewed the office of the prime minister as a stepping stone to personal wealth. That was never the thinking of Prime Minister Patrick John. So as much as we can vilify him and hate him for some of the mistakes that he did, at the end of the day, he was very much concerned about the well-being. And to me, that more than anything else is what strikes me about Prime Minister Patrick John. As a kid, when I first came to town, I got to know Patrick John because my aunt was a very stern supporter of him, and I got to know him through that relationship. But it was always about the caring. There was nothing about the social class. Nobody was too low. And that to me is what is most striking. The other thing I want to note as well, in 1978, Dominica registered economic growth of some 11%. That is the highest single rate of growth we've seen in Dominica anytime throughout its recorded, or the history of keeping records of economic growth. We had high growth under OJ Seraphin, incidentally, in 1980, of about 15%, but that was after Hurricane David in 1979, where the economy fell by about 20%, and we had a recovery. But in terms of standalone growth, that was remarkable. And at the time, agriculture, of course, was king. Agriculture contributed some 30% to overall gross domestic product, overall output. Today, agriculture contributes about 15%. So we see almost halving, if you were to compare that period and now, almost half of what agriculture contributed in 1977-78 when Patrick John was Prime Minister.
But you see, Mr. Gregoire,
yes, Simeon.
there's a difference in politics. There is such a thing called empowerment of the masses. By extension, that means the empowerment of people and the empowerment of the common man, which does not know any boundaries, does not know any political affiliations. I'm happy that those things are being said, because you see, you cannot speak about Patrick John and the Dominica Labour Party without comparing Patrick John's Labour Party with the Dominica Labour Party of today. And there's a reason for it.
Simeon, 1 second. I'm getting a little feedback coming through. I think it may be from Thomson because his Facebook page may be the volume may be up because he has to listen through Facebook. Maybe he can adjust that. So, okay, so go right ahead, Simeon.
You cannot not do that, because you see, when one looks at the criticism that Patrick John endured, and you look at the elevated pitch which led to his downfall, and you compare it today, to some of the egregious mistakes that are happening, one consciously or subconsciously or realistically has to ask the question. And it's a hypothetical question. Maybe the academics like Dr. George and Dr. Fontaine might be able to unravel it for me. But the hypothetical question is, if the list of evils that Patrick John was accused of was so evil, the people who ascribed those evils to Patrick John then seemingly are the very same people who subscribe to and promote the same type of evils today. Patrick John was accused of nepotism. He was not nepotistic, yet today nepotism is a mass. We speak about the houses. I'm sure Mr. Seraphin can tell you that in Patrick's time, no parliamentary representative had a say in who got a house in any constituency. I know for a fact that it was channeled through the Housing Development Corporation on Charles Avenue. I attended the opening of the Baphoset housing scheme in Baphoset, as well as those in Canefield as a member of the Labour Youth Organization. I remember people going for keys to those houses. And I remember people shouting, you say freedom, I buy your Fujikosu by your Aklepo. There were laborites who were opposed to the fact that freedomites from Virgin Lane and Pong and Rosa were getting some of those houses. You understand what I'm saying? Today, that is, you cannot say that, you know. And so we have to ask ourselves, you see, if we are to look back on history and personalities in history, and we have to identify mistakes that they made and to label them as so wrong, it begs the question that whether in truth and in fact they were wrong, because if they were so wrong, these wrong things that Patrick John was accused of would not be so prevalent and predominant today and perpetuated and supported by the very people who championed the cause against him because of those seemingly wrong things. And so there must be a discussion around that, you know, because Patrick John is a figure in history. And if, as a figure in history, we do not learn from the historical mistakes surrounding Patrick John, Dominica will not be the better off. Okay? And so if we're talking about the development of Dominica and the future of Dominica, we have to be honest with ourselves and we call it examine our consciences on two levels. Were we right in condemning the things that he did? Were we justified? Or are we justified in upholding some of the things that we see today? And that's a pivotal question that must be asked. That's a pivotal question that must be asked.
Now, Simeon, before I go to former Prime Minister Oliver Seraphin, because when I go to him, I don't just want him to comment on some of those things I know he's ready to comment on in terms of the Patrick John era, but I want to also hear about the things that took place and the situation, the circumstances under the Oliver Seraphin era. It was not a very long period as Prime Minister, but there was an Oliver O.J. Seraphin. I wanted to ask you to punctuate a few things there, Simeon. You put on your social scientist cap, and let's talk a little bit. The youth are the future. They are the leaders of tomorrow. It has always been that way. Simeon, how do you see, looking at the spectrum, the widespread, from Frank Barron through LeBlanc and Patrick and Eugene, coming all the way to today, how do you see the youth have been treated? How is the organization for you, the support of youth, the motivation of youth, the example set for youth? Let's talk about that for a few minutes before I go over.
Well, to begin with, you see, one has to begin from the vantage point of what is the philosophy behind youth development. Let us not forget about it that a National Youth Council was established under Patrick John. And who were the members of the National Youth Council? We had Pierre Charles. I think we had a number of other people, prominent persons today, who were part of the National Youth Council. Many of them were, if we can recall, were not too favorite to Patrick, but he still supported the National Youth Council began the process of giving them a stipend and giving them all the opportunities that they needed for youth. Remember, Patrick at one time was going to establish a national youth camp in Londonderry, which was fiercely opposed by many people who were saying he was going to establish some mini military or something like that. Let us not forget that. Let us not forget as well that it was under Patrick John and H.L. Christian where we saw the largest transformation of educational opportunities in Dominica. The Clifton Jupiter Community College, the Sixth Form College, the Alpha Center, the Londonderry Youth Camp, and all those sorts of things there. We saw a great the expansion of the Dominica Cadet Corps, okay? The integration of technical subjects in the good things like the Goodwill Secondary School, and the what you call it, the Grand Bay Primary School at the time. Let us not forget all those things. And so we have to think of I think it was also under Patrick John that the voting age was reduced from 21 to 18. Isn't that so, Mr. Seraphin, in 1985? Okay? So when we speak about of what is done for you, have to think of the philosophy for youth and the empowerment of youth. And you also have to think that even in the same heyday of the Dread Act, which people often refer to, let us not forget the resolution of that thing came about when Patrick knowingly gave his land to the Dreads as a means of resolving the issues of the Dreads going onto people's lands and harassing them, piece of land that he had. And to my recollection, I know that the industry that was started on that part of land still continues today. Okay, so we have to be to me, I think that if we're talking about youth, we have to talk about the empowerment of youth. We have to think about the stability of youth. And the question that we have to ask is, when we look at the situation of our youth today versus that under Patrick John, what is the extent of the empowerment of our youth, but more specifically, and it is even more frightening, the stability of the young people in Dominica today? What is their hope for employment? What is their hope for personal safety? What is their hope for educational advancement? Who gets scholarships? Who gets opportunities to study? Who gets jobs? Under Patrick John, every freedomite was allowed the opportunity to go to study and be given opportunities for advancing their education over sometimes labor rights. I'm not sure if you are aware of those things, okay? And so we have to ask ourselves, is there equal opportunity for the young people of today? Or do you have to have a meritorious pass of a certain color to obtain opportunities in life? Just look at, I had the opportunity myself to work at the Aid Bank. And I remember when I started working at the Aid Bank, the loan portfolio of the number of young people in Dominica who had gotten their agricultural and industrial loans under the tenure of Patrick John in the early stages of the Aid Bank. And that was a remarkable feat. Another thing we know that Patrick John did was the establishment of what you call the National Priority Training Needs, to ensure that the young people who were selected to go to study met the national training needs of Dominica. Today, how is that being done? How is it being distributed? You know, and were young people, the fact that we had young people in 1978, 79 who could rise up en masse against Patrick John spoke of the freedom of expression of young people, which they cannot do today. Young people today are muzzled, are stifled, are being frustrated, and are being traded off for all sorts of different things, because there is a philosophy and a principle that says that the young people of Dominica today don't belong to Dominica, but they should belong to a certain political party. And if they don't belong to a certain political party, there must be no opportunities. They might as well not exist. And their whole advancement in life must be compromised because they do not subscribe to a certain political practice. And that young people today are being smoke-screened and blindsided, and you could almost say brainwashed into thinking the way they think today. When you have young people today telling you that they have to beg, that they have to do this, that they have to do that. And one of the saddest things I have seen in Dominica today is the compromise of the young intellectuals in Dominica. There are people with bachelor's and master's degree who have sold out, basically compromised and watered down their educational advancement and development and accepted mediocrity, accepted being trade off, accepted having to beg for a job. That I would say is very unfortunate for the future of Dominica. I just want to rest there.
Yes, and very well said. I mean, all these things need to be said because this is why we're doing this program. We're doing this for the purpose of educating the people who don't know. There was a different time, a different era where there was a different philosophy when labor meant something else. It meant something else different to Libla and to different to Patrick John from what it appears to mean today, as Simeon was saying. I heard our Prime Minister say sometime over the last few days, he was asked a question and he said, if two people came to me for a job, one was a laborite and one was a UWP supporter, and they both had the same qualification, I would give it to the laborite. Now, he did not qualify that, for example, to say, well, I would look at the length of the level of experience that they've had, their knowledge that they have, their attitude towards work, whether they are productive, whether they have a positive mental attitude. He did not qualify that. As far as he was concerned, he would just give it to whoever was a laborer. Now, I don't think so. You are sending a message to the young people, as Simeon was saying, whether you have a PhD or master PhD, you have to be a laborate, otherwise you will not get the job above somebody else who may be more experienced and more knowledgeable or may have a better positive mental attitude to the work or better work ethics than you do. So it's really not developing the young people, as Simeon said. So Oliver, Seraphin, I want to go to you now because you're hearing all of this and you live through this. So you lived through the Patrick John time. Tell us all of those things you wanted to tell us, and then let's talk about the OJ era.
Yes, Sheridan, I listened, and in fact, I believe that Dr. George did, in fact, bring out some very important points which had to do with the uh, campaign finance reform, and he did mention some aspects of our constitution and so forth. I believe that what we have to really search and come up with some answers for would be the fact that, first of all, Dominica did get a Republican constitution, and Barbados just got theirs recently. So we're ahead. But what has transpired since has been a situation where you have governments of Libla or PJ and or myself, where at the worst of times, the most ministers we had was about 6. I don't think we crossed over that threshold. And the function of the ministries are not much different to what it is today. So I think we may have to examine, and that's where Dr. Fontaine comes in, as to our ability to sustain 10, 12, 14 permanent secretaries, as well as the same number or more of ministers. What are their functions that are so different now than it was before? We need to examine that and see if there's some way in which we can at least address that and see if there's a possibility of restructuring the management of our business, the Dominica country, to see whether we are not overmanaged by too many ministers for which pay has to be found. It also brings to mind that we need to, it was Patrick John, I believe, who came up with the 21 seats. If we look at the population of Dominica and compare it to the population of the other Eastern Caribbean countries, for example, St. Lucia, 180,000 and so on, with 17 seats, aren't we overrepresented in terms of numbers of constituencies? We need to look at the boundaries of those various constituencies and look at, for example, whether this Roseau South constituency, as an example, taken in Bath Estate and Kings Hill and going all the way to the very edges of Lubia, and the numbers of persons in that constituency versus the constituency of the Valley. So these are specific areas. When you talk about non-partisan, and I see Simeon making that point very strong about the fact that people got houses at Bath Estate and Canefield. And it had nothing to do with partisanship. I can address this, and I could attest to it because I was primarily involved with having to become the person as chairman of the National Development Corporation, of the Housing Corporation, to do the interviews. And the persons, when I come into my office on any given day, the majority of persons that be sitting outside there would be persons seeking to get a house from the administration. We didn't have at that time, and I was responsible for that. And the list was passed on to the Minister of Housing, which was the Prime Minister or the Premier. He had no need to look into whether or not this person was a laborite or a freedomite. And if you go to Bath Estate, to go to Canefield, you'll find that the generation past, they were of all political descriptions. So as to why should one have to suffer because of the fact that you do not support a political party is in askance. And I can talk about away from the politics per se. I was directly involved in entrepreneurship. I did some businesses that suffered as a consequence of that kind of behavior, which began with Eugenia Charles, for example, where I remember bringing in a fishing boat, $1 million fishing boat for long line fishing. And one day I was told that the boat has been seized and so forth and what have you. And the reason for that given was that it carried a flag, which was an American flag on the boat, but in fact was registered as Caribbean Fisheries Limited, just like I had done with the airlines that I'd had before that. And at that juncture, there was fish on board, and the fish was, I was told, couldn't be sold. And eventually we went to the cabinet, my wife and myself and so on, and we found out that it is a political matter because our Fisheries Act was then presented to Parliament at a time that the boat was seized. So that was an example. Another example of this was when I was into the business of exporting agricultural produce, and I had a major possibility of dominating the BVI, Tortola, and I was selling 80,000 pounds of food to the Tortolian supermarkets by chartering the Big Dean and other boats to carry this. I found out that Eugenia Charles had identified me as a potential drug person, so she brought in the army to look into what was in the boxes, and they opened all the boxes, and my wife was involved with the business of craft export, and there were some monkeys that made out of coconuts. They took out the tail and they made a mess out of this whole thing. And not so long after that, I was on the boat and we were outside of St. Kitts, and the United States Coast Guard came in and searched my boat because they were informed by Dominica that there was a possibility of some matter that was not very legal taking place. So we did get this. And we also had the situation also where in my premises at Concord, the police was coming in at nighttime and walking around the property and so on, creating a kind of apprehension for my wife and my 2 children. So I've had those experiences. I've had a more recent experience where Dominica had a problem with the sand. Remember the Mathieu Dam situation down at Layou, and I engaged in a joint venture with a company called Typico out of Martinique. And we came in and we moved all the dirt and the soil that had blocked the bridge, the Layou Bridge. And we were told by the UWP government that we could have had that stockpiled in the Layou area, just as you turn from the bridge and you go in towards Bells. On the left-hand side, we had this stockpile there. And we did business there. And we were told at the time of the Labour Party coming into power that in 2000, that the owners have decided that our equipment had to be confiscated. I didn't get any help from the government at the time. And not long after that, I got a letter from Minister Austri saying that my taking sand out of the river would constitute a problem of an environmental consequence. And as we speak today, 20 years later, people are still in the area of the river. In other words, there was this kind of feeling that unless you behave in a way that you are a total sycophant, you have to be treated with a certain level of disrespect. And I must say this, that when you look back at the Patrick John situation, he was at that time with an LTD Ford, a simple, ordinary car. And people felt that that LTD Ford was a little bit too glamorous for Patrick John. You had a situation which we do not talk much about, but the registry burning, because Leo Austin, which I just mentioned in the earlier part of my discussion, was found guilty of making some changes in the valuation in order to pay less taxes and so on, which I understand took place in a more recent time. But more importantly was that Patrick John, as usual, in his feisty way, said, well, okay, if you all are saying that this is what happened with Leo Austin, where he has gone to the registry and given a false information in order to pay less taxes, he's going to examine all the transfers that were being made of land sales in the more recent past. And guess what? The registry was burned down. And so we have to look back and look at our situation and say this. In the days of Patrick John and LeBlanc and myself and so forth, there was a very strong dynamic with the process of management of country. You had the party in power having an executive that was strong and that would determine the course of events that's going to take place, even in the government, at the government level, where certain ideas and so on would come off the party branches and would emerge into the party executive. And from there, it goes to the cabinet, and the cabinet takes a decision and goes to the parliament. So we need to restructure our thinking as to what it is. Where does the power lie? Does it lie with an individual? And even when we talk about Patrick being forceful and aggressive about things, he recognized that the ministerial process has to work. H.L. Christian is a very strong and very positive and very effective leader as the Minister of Education. Vic Rivera was also an extraordinarily versatile and very exemplary person in terms of capacity in the Ministry of Finance. And so did I act as the Minister of Agriculture, our Minister of Communications, of which I was before. So we have to look at all of those things and say, is the structure of management, the discipline that we knew, in the civil service. And not only that too, how do you emerge in the hierarchy? I mean, you start off at a certain point in the ministry and you grew and developed and evolved until you become a permanent secretary. And now we see permanent secretaries are coming from wherever and however. And so as a result of that, you do not find that they had the knowledge of the rudiments of the business of management of their particular ministry, because they came from somewhere else, not having been treated with the understanding of how the system really works. And so in my response to the gentleman, the Dr. George, who came from the Salisbury constituency, who made mention of the Constitution and the rights of persons to vote, etc., and more importantly, campaign finance reform. I recall in 1995 that Rosie Douglas called upon me and he says to me that, things are getting a little bit difficult. The funds are not there and the various candidates are calling upon him to pay for truckers. Is there anything that can be done? And I was able to get in touch with a certain gentleman who has Ronaldo Giunta, I could mention his name, who was a connection to the French administration, and they were able to release, I believe it was $80,000 US one weekend the week before the elections, and that money was then used to assist Rosie in 1995. Unfortunately, it was not adequate. I can talk about the fact that in 2000, the very same Rosie Douglas again and I had discussions as to how can he get assistance. And there was a group that I was associated with that was able to finance part of that project. I was able to go to Mapping television as well and get from the gentleman who is the general manager there, who approved of and decided that could give a credit note for $185,000 in order for Rosie to campaign that year in 2000. And so it was that there was some very aggressive, how would I say it, electioneering taking place through the assistance of that finance. But then outside of finance for a political party, you're dead, you're in the woods. You can't make any headway because you need to have that. And so campaign finance reform is particularly significant, as well as the need for a constitutional commission. In fact, one began with Telford Judges, who is a judge. Telford Judges began this process of re-examining the Constitution of Dominica, because after 40 years, my goodness, there is a chance that we can look back at 40 years of our existence as a nation and decide that the time has come for some changes in that Constitution. I recall that Dr. Liverpool approached me and said to me that there was going to be a committee being set up for the purpose of re-examining the Constitution, come up with some ideas. So my suggestion would be, if this group of persons who are so eminent and eloquent at talking, it is an imperative that we look at how do we set up as a national matter of urgency, some commission to look into the Constitution, some commission to look into campaign finance reform, and also to re-examine whether we are not overrepresented among the constituencies of Dominica. Finally, let me just put Dr. George on alert that my loss in Salisbury in the year he's mentioning was against all considerations in terms of popularity. The reason for that was after the hurricane, the election list was prepared in Barbados, and me and my innocence and my conviction that people are honest and sincere, believe that the list that we got from Barbados would have all the persons who supported OG as well as the opposition on the list, and only to find out that people from Salisbury went up and the names were not there. It was deleted from the Barbados machine. And so, we have to start looking at election as something that is important in a democratic context. And this is my opening salvo as far as that is concerned. But I will be talking about my OJ Seraphin's administration later on. But I think this is enough for now.
Mr. G and Dr. George, I would like to, I don't know if Mr. Seraphin can remember that in 1980, if you search the records of Dominica today, the results for Salisbury constituency was never called in. A winner was just declared. To this day, even if you go to the Electoral Commission, you will not see the number of votes. If you check the statistics of the elections of 1980, Salisbury was just declared. Okay,
that is so correct.
To this day, we have no results, we have no figures.
That's very correct.
And from the night of 1980, we knew that was a stolen seat.
Well, I don't know if it was stolen, but my research, both academically and through the common man, suggested that there were some unresolved issues regarding some votes.
You know what I want to do now? I think, former Prime Minister Seraphin, you have given us some stuff there. You have put together something there, which in your remarks there, which shows the concern of Simeon Joseph about the whole question of philosophy. What drives the actions that we take, the things that we do, the decisions that we make, the policies that we put forward? I mean, what drives it? And I want to go to Dr. Thomson Fontaine, because Dr. Fontaine, you can see if you had a policy, a philosophy like Patrick Rowland John did, it was about the personal development of the people. Everything was for national development, nation building, the upliftment of the little man. They call him the little man with the big heart. He was such a short man, but he had such a big heart. So if we go back to that and you look today at the philosophy, where what we see is that PJ did not have a large amount, an excessive amount of money available to him. The budget, as Oliver Seraphin might recall, was nothing compared to what the national budget is today. Also, you don't hear about 4 point something billion dollars being stashed somewhere that nobody can account for. And then you don't see a few people who are friends of a regime just receiving millions and millions of dollars to build hotels. Whereas the people who, the indigenous people who have toiled for years to build a hotel, worked hard, build it, and then maintained it, and they were the backbone of Dominica's tourism for many, many years. Oliver Seraphin was also in it. He had a property down there, which was a hotel he built as well. You have people like the Anchorage and the Evergreen and the Garaway and the Castle Comfort Lodge. Many of these hotels that were built, locals, they're not getting free money. They're being told, go to the aid bank and borrow money. But you have a select few, and a recent example, if that document that was published recently as a leaked document from a secret cabinet paper, if that document was in there is correct, if that is an indication of the proportions to which in which the funds are distributed for some of those hotels, based on the funds that come from the CBI program, it seems to me, Dr. Fontaine, that we need to rethink this whole thing. Because it means that it's just a select few that are getting it. They get this free money, but so much money goes into fees. So much money is paid out for consultancies. So much money is put aside for marketing. I mean, in a hotel that is supposed to cost 75 million US dollars, only around $21 million or something like that is for construction of the actual hotel. So if that is the case for, I guess that is one of the smaller ones, 75 million. The bigger ones probably cost 400 million. I'm not sure. But is that the proportion in which people are getting fees? You hear about people from the Kempinski Hotel, some people getting fees of 160, whatever it is, $1 million fees. Why is it that we cannot use some of that money to build some of our local hotels that have crashed in the storms, and to build some of our local manufacturer entrepreneurs who really want to get ahead? They have the talent, they really work hard, and they want to get there. Why don't we build them? Why can't we go back, Dr. Fontaine, to building an economy like we had before during the PG days and so on, when you had people like DCP and you had Blows Agro Products and you had, well, you had the garment, the BTI gene making the garment, my Trinity Industries Limited making garments, you had Bello, you had all candle industries, you had Paul Pastroni, you had mattresses. People were making mattresses and selling mat and furniture. There were big furniture factories, Raful and all these Astafans, they were in furniture. All of that has gone wrong the tube, Dr. Fontaine. I want to go over to you so that you can maybe give us your thoughts on some of that, comparing those regimes, the eras to what we have now, and the kind of economy that we build, especially in light of the recent report from the IMF about Dominica.
Yes, Sheridan, you've raised a very important point, which I would like to comment on, linked to the comment that Simeon made earlier, and former Prime Minister O.J. Seraphin alluded to, in that this scale, this naked corruption that we see in Dominica, this public theft that is going on before our very eyes, this use of government resources to enrich individuals, it is so much in your face, it is so blatant. And yet, there are Dominicans who see nothing wrong with it. And that to me is the most startling point about it. And Simeon made the point very clearly. People who were adamantly opposed to what PJ did during his tenure, who were prepared to take to the streets, who were prepared to destroy buildings, who were prepared to destroy lives to make a point against PJ. Yet these very same people are comfortable with what is going on today. And the question is why? How could something be wrong 40 years ago and somehow it's accepted today. That's one of the enigmas, it's one of the paradoxes of Dominican society, that we are so accepting of things that are so wrong that the prime minister feels that they can do anything and get away with it. And that's where we are, sadly. You know, this prime minister believes he can do anything and get away with it. And you talked about this hotel, for goodness sakes, a developer who has not put one nail on a tent, a developer who was not built any building yet is given millions of dollars to develop a hotel. I mean, it is skin crawling. It is, it causes me to cringe, quite frankly, when I think about it. When I think about the harm that is being done to Dominica, when I think about the fact that the CBI resources will not last. There is a finite shelf life for the CBI program. It's going to come to an end. It may stretch for another 5 years, but I suspect 5 years is probably the limit to which this is going to go. And yet we see the behavior of individuals who are supporting them. And that is why this can continue. And this continues because people are willing to accept it. And I hope that we can somehow evoke the spirit of the 70s into Dominicans again.
Yeah, well, Thomson, well, thanks a lot for that, and I'm hoping that
they really need to really buck up, because it is mind-boggling that we are where we are today, with this naked corruption that we see, with all of that is going on, this malgovernance, this really poor administration that is sadly driving Dominicans into the ground, and yet still people are condoning it.
Thomson, I wanted to, before I go over to Lambie to take a few calls, because I will go to Lambie in a minute to take a few calls after you, because I really wanted you to comment on this. Because as we said, comparing the regimes, comparing the eras of Patrick, John, and Leblanc, and so on, and we're looking at the budgets and looking at the whole question of national debt growing and growing and growing from where it was. And we're looking at deficits. And we're looking at people going back to parliaments for appropriations of more money to take care of things that were projects that there were no bids, no tenders for those projects. And they come back and say, well, the money was not enough. We need more money. How do you justify that? And the fact that we have all of this money. In fact, when we look at the IMF report, I really would like you to comment on that, because that report is indicating that there's a tremendous amount of money came through the CBI program, tremendous amount of revenue, and that is what kept the country, because of the construction and so on that took from those monies. And yet, if all of that money going around, are you telling me that we're still not paying our bills properly, because you're still seeing all these debts increasing and all kind of things? And Thomson, I really want you to comment on this, because it seems to me that this money is not being used to grow the revenue of the country. In other words, we're not growing our productivity. We're not growing our manufacturing sector. We're not growing our export-led growth. We're not really looking at foreign earnings coming in. We're not looking at creating real sustainable jobs.
Yes.
We're not growing our productivity. We're not growing our manufacturing sector. We're really looking at foreign earnings coming, creating real sustainable.
Yes, Sheridan, I made a note earlier on this, and I realized that the government of Dominica between 2018, actually over 2019 and 2020, borrowed $367 million from National Bank of Dominica, at a time when this government made several billions of dollars in passport sales. Something is wrong with this, because on the one hand, you are gaining revenues through the sale of passports. On the other hand, you are running your banking system into the ground. So we have a situation now where our debt to GDP ratio, the debt to GDP ratio has increased between 2016 and 2020 by 33%. In 2016, it was 73% of GDP, and in 2020, it has jumped to 106% of GDP. How is that even making sense? Now on Thursday night, I will be on the Workers' Voice. I'll take a lot more time to go through those numbers and explain to the Dominican public what exactly is going on. But what this shows is a very frightening picture. What this tells me is that Dominica is in dire straits. We are hanging on the edge because you have a situation where you have all of this revenues ostensibly, and at the same time, everything is going in reverse. The private sector is being squeezed to the point where the private sector businesses are continuing to close down. Employment continues to go down within the private sector. And yes, we have all of this money, but our debt levels are rising. It makes no sense. It makes absolutely no sense. And Dominicans need to open their eyes. What exactly is going on? What were those monies that were borrowed from the National Bank used for? Is $367 million. What was it used for? Where did it go? What happened to it? These are the kind of questions that we need to be asking ourselves as Dominicans. These are the kind of issues that we need to concern ourselves with, because we have a situation in this country of just blatant, in-your-face corruption, a situation where it is hurting the country, and that is the real impact. Corruption has a real cost. The real cost is in livelihoods. The real cost is in people's lives. The real cost is increasing poverty. The real cost is in the number of Dominicans who are fleeing Dominica. In this same IMF report, the population of Dominica is decreasing by about 2% a year. About several thousand Dominicans are leaving Dominica permanently every year because they simply cannot take what's going on in Dominica. So we have some big issues. We have some big problems, major problems.
Sheridan.
And I think it's time the Dominican public wake up. I get the sense that our people have gone to sleep. I get the sense that we are just in a kind of a winter wonderland, a kind of a la-la land, that, we're just kind of going through the motions, and it is time for us to get up. I think now is the time for us to get up and open our eyes.
Yes, thank you, Tom. OJ, I want to come back to you in a minute, but I must go over to Lambi to take some calls. Lambi, listen, give the people the numbers and let's take some calls. Let's make sure that we can hear them, because we really should have opened the lines a lot earlier. But let's take some calls from persons who are listening. Over to you, Lambi.
The Global View and Q. The numbers are 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097, 616-425-7, 305-432-9624. That will be for the international listeners. We are taking your calls right now. Since there are no calls coming in at the moment, we'll pass it. Oh, there's a call. Good evening, caller. Thanks for joining us. Go ahead, please.
As Mr. Thomson was speaking about, we can understand why some people are supporting what is happening presently now. Well, you see, in the 70s, one set was ruling and the other set wanted control. But now the both is married together, so we no longer have to fight. We're just enjoying and having fun.
Okay, you made that point. Let's take some more calls. 449-3095, 449-3096, 616-425-7, 305-432-9624. We are taking your calls.
Lambi, if you want, while you're waiting for the calls, because I suspect some people are just lining up to call, let me just acknowledge. So you go right ahead. Go right ahead, Lambi, before I do this.
On the international line, go ahead, please.
Yes, good evening, and let me congratulate the panel for the presentation tonight. And just to add that there was major investment in the banana industry by Patrick John. he introduced the Barrier Development Program, which brought technical support to the industry and major funding for replanting and rehabilitation. And this set the foundation for the boom within the banana industry in the late 70s and 80s. Thank you and good night.
And good night, and thanks a lot for that as well. Lambi, if you want to take another call, okay, while you're waiting for your next call, just interrupt me. I just want to acknowledge some of the folks that are with us on Facebook. I can see many people out there on Facebook. Many of them are making comments. Peter Carbon was one of those persons here. He just called and spoke to us. Jason Fontaine is here. So you just interrupt me if you have a call, and I'll just go over to you right away. You have let's see, we have Augustina John here. We have Penny Shirley here. We have Celia King. We have Augustus John. There is David Joseph is there with us, as I said. Hermina Watson Duvernay is also with us, and the many comments. I'm not going to have the time to read all of the comments, but certainly Linton Scotland is there with us, and he had a couple of comments as well. I also see Joe Williams, and notice Isidore is also here, and let's see you again. Michael Alexis is also with us. So there are quite a few people with us, joining us and listening and making some comments. Maybe at some point, if we have a moment, we can mention one or two. We don't want to others comment. But Lambi, from now on as we go, just interrupt us as the calls come in. I wanted to go over to former Prime Minister Oliver Seraphin. I know you had one or two things that you wanted to add to what we have been saying there.
Well, yes, Sheridan. I think, similar to the U.S. that is going through its confusion as to the rights of the black man in a white community, Dominica, prior to LeBlanc, had issues with the class system. And I mean, it's probably a gray area that people wouldn't like me to talk about, but I venture to say that we have had, under LeBlanc, PJ, myself, and others, what you call the social revolution took place. And I wish to engage the fact that Dr. Fontaine comes from where my mother came from, which is Grand Fond. And I remember walking as a boy from the lake to Grand Fond. And Gregoire, for example, and some parts like that. And my grandmother owned, a bakery there and whatever. And those were the days where you had to walk so many miles to get to a village, and LeBlanc did the rest by building the roads that led to Rosalie and into Grand Fond. I'm saying so to say that a social revolution having taken place, that we have Dr. George from Salisbury. He doesn't come with all of those highfalutin social connections of the past, whose surnames I wouldn't mention now. But a revolution took place, and I seem to think that people haven't realized that the country bookie is no longer country bookie. They are now Dr. Fontaine, they are now Dr. George. Children, your children, Sheridan and mine, have moved on too. They become professionals, leading industry, etc. And so I seem to think that in the diaspora, there are Dominicans that are from St. Thomas, St. Croix, and also born in New York and other such places, whose children are superbly qualified in every aspect of the development process of a country like Dominica. I'm suggesting that there should be a network of that community that would engage itself to move away from the unfortunate fact that subservience is the name of the game and move into their own independent forum to express themselves about matters that are relevant to us. That's one. Secondly, I'm a founder member of the Dominica Hotel and Tours Association. I'm a founder member of the Eco Inns of Dominica. There you had the Evergreen Hotel, you had Hummingbird Inn, you have Sims's, you have a number of hotels that come from the genuine effort. Afi Martin also has such a hotel. There are a number of them that were around, Papillot and so forth. These were hotels that were very, very much within the mold of what we knew as to be nature-oriented resorts or inns, as the case may be. And persons came from various parts of the world. In my own experience at Floral Gardens, Cosmos and Globo and the other people from Germany would come for hiking. The reality is that 5-star hotels may be okay in a person's point of view, especially if you travel and you've been accustomed to 5 stars. But in the context of Dominica, the Shanklin and Cox report that was made available to us, the Dr. Bellot, who did a tourism sector plan for Dominica, as a chairman of the NDC, as someone who came into the NDC as a representative of the Dominica Hotel and Tourism Association and the Eco Inns, which Eugenia Charles had to accept me as a member of the board. And later on, when the UWP came in, I was made chairman among very elitist persons of capacities like yourself, Sheridan Gregoire. And there we were discussing how do we develop the small inns. And there it was that the Aid Bank, which is what I'm referring to here because of the fact that our friend Dr. Fontaine has brought it up. The Aid Bank received those clients, and 90%, if not all of them, have fallen short of being able to meet their payments when the hurricanes came because they were probably underinsured, etc. The fact of the problems that they are having, when you look at all the small hotels that we grew up with, practically none of them exist. In my case, there was a situation of an appropriation of my hotel for road expansion, and the question as to when I get paid, how I get paid, remained a situation that reached the courts. However, what I'm trying to say, though, is what is the policy on the indigenous hoteliers? How are they going to coexist with the 5-star benefits that you all are mentioning in terms of what resources could be made available to them? In most of these small inns and hotels of Dominica that have been left to rot, as the case may be, there were persons who had plowed back their profits into the expansion and improvement of their various hotels. And when the hurricanes came, they were destroyed. What specific program or idea or policy that's directed at the small hoteliers, the indigenous small hotels of Dominica? That is something that is of concern and should be addressed in the appropriate place, in the appropriate forum. But I dare suggest that the Dominica Hotel and Tourism Association, as an organization, need to get up and stand up and represent its membership. And those of us who have been left to wander in the wilderness whilst the 5-star hotels have emerged.
Yeah, and thank you, Oliver. What I'll say in the remaining moments of the show, I don't want to have to ask anybody to come in. I think if Lambi doesn't have a call, anybody can just jump in and contribute. I don't know whether Dr. George wanted to contribute anything at this time, because really and truly, we come into the dying moments of the show. And I just want to give everybody a chance. Jump in anytime if you have something that you wanted to contribute. If there's a call that come in anytime, Lambi will take it. Dr. George, let me go over to you to see what you want to add to this as we come closer to the end of our program.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Gregoire. And I will just echo some of the things that I heard tonight that I really thought was quite honestly very touching. First and foremost, I understand that the former Prime Minister made a plea to us here this evening. And I think he said it quite vividly, that if we are so passionate about constitutional reform and electoral reform, that perhaps we can organize ourselves in some form of manner to take on that agenda. I think there are groups in Dominica that are doing that. I don't know if his idea is more of a unification of ideas towards that effort, but I think it's a genuine effort. And yes, I want to support that idea. But I also understand that there are groups in Dominica who is working toward that. Really touching. The other thing that I think I would like to add, we talked about good governance, and of course, this lecture series, is really about the legacy of our former prime ministers and current leaders, and so the whole concept of good governance. And so, what does that mean in a practical sense? And so, the United Nations have identified 8 variables that envelopes the whole idea of good governance. And one of it is the rule of law, transparency, responsiveness, consensus-oriented, equity and inclusion, effectiveness, and accountability. Now, I say that because, we have been hearing things. If we have to pick on just a few of them, for example, the rule of law. If you live in a country where people say that they have no regard for the Constitution, that's a concern. That's with the rule of law. Transparency, if someone says it's not really your business where the financing comes from, that's a concern. In fact, it should be the opposite. It should be transparency. This is where it comes from. You want to know where it comes from? I am happy to tell you where it's come from. In fact, this is the rule of law. I'm happy to abide by the rule of law. And that's the way it should be. I mean, we have tonight with us a former prime minister, and he is appealing, and to his own admission, he's saying, after 40 years, don't you think that the system can be redefined and revisited? And the answer to the question is yes. And so, Mr. Gregoire, that's what I would have touched on those few points there to echo my support in that regard.
Yes, let me go to Simeon. Simeon,
touch on those few points there.
But you see, Mr. Gregoire and Dr. John.
Also, I wanted to make a quick point.
Go ahead, Dr.
Yes, by all means, Thomson.
But you see, Mr. Gregoire and Dr. John.
Also, I wanted to make a quick point.
Yes, by all means, Thomson.
Also, I wanted to make a quick point. Yes.
Thomson, go ahead.
Okay, I think I'm still allowed to speak. Okay, sorry about this delay. Yeah, the point I wanted to make, which was raised by Prime Minister O.J. Seraphin, when he talked about, I lost my train of thought. I wanted to make the point, but anyway, and then I think it was mentioned as well by Dr. George. In terms of people's perception or the way society reacts or responds, and one of the real problems I've had, or one of the real issues that concerns me a lot, is the situation in Dominica, as OJ highlighted, for example, where the government is more concerned about 5-star hotels as against looking out for the indigenous hoteliers. They're more concerned about providing jobs for trainees and St. Lucians as against Dominicans. These are very concerning facets of Dominican society. Very, very concerning. What we see happening, you could never see, the kind of putting above Dominicans, foreigners. You would never see that in the era of Leblanc, Patrick John, and O.J. So never. Because these prime ministers, they were concerned about the well-being and the welfare of Dominicans first and foremost. I happened to tune in towards the end of the program tonight on the other side, and I saw Sam and Kenny trying to justify why Prime Minister Skerry did not fight to keep Ross University, talking about it was a business decision, had nothing to do with Dominica. Really? after 40 years. So it is part of the pattern that we see where this government does not care about Dominica. And I say that without any apologies. The government of Dominica does not care about Dominicans. And in the few instances where some benefit is given to Dominicans, they can't even lay claim to it. Apartments are given and taken away as if they were a stock on the US stock exchange. People are in an apartment one day, they have no ownership to it. They might die or they might move out, their family loses it. It's crazy. Where is the caring? Where is the compassion? Where is this yearning and desire for Dominicans to benefit? It's just mind-boggling, really.
Yes, and thanks a lot for those remarks here this time. I want to go over to Simeon.
Yes. Because on the heels of what has been said, again, I want to, because this program is about Patrick John, and I want to relate what is being said about Patrick John. And I want to ask a sobering question. Do you think that in the days of Patrick John, these things could happen? Now, when we look at the people who objected to whatever they said Patrick John did, the Dominica Hotel and Tourism Association then, the DAIC then, the Dominica Employers Federation then, all these organizations came together and took out a man whom they said was not working in their best interest. And today, these people are actually colluding with a government that is working against their own interests and making excuses. Allow me to say, Mr. Gregoire, that I remember in the days of Patrick John, there was a certain group of people, businessmen and prominent people, who would support Patrick John. And what was the term they used to call them?
Maybe OJ can remind us.
They used to call them boom boom fly.
Or the boom boom flies, yeah. That was a term that was used at that time.
Yes,
yeah.
That any prominent person, businessman, educator, who sought to be on Patrick's side and to do anything, even they were called boom boom fly. Now, Dr. Thomson, that kind of spoke about the other side tonight and the hosts on the other side. Now, let's put some context and relevance to that terminology and the posture taken by people of business concern in Dominica today to sell their independence and their autonomy to a politician. Dr. Fontaine, I'm sure you will agree with me that in no society do entrepreneurs, businessmen, people with money sell their independence and their autonomy to politicians. Am I right, Dr. Thomson? Because they realize that as the business community, as the engines of growth, right, they control the economy. They control the economic stability of the country. So the government has to respect them. But instead, we have businessmen and hoteliers who are afraid of politicians, who are afraid of the government, and are sucking up to them for their own survival. Isn't that an anomaly that just does not make sense in a decent economy or in any stable country? And so it is a far cry, because I'm saying to myself, and every time I see what is happening today of relevance, I must throw my mind back. Because the historical reality of the person we are discussing tonight is how you call it now? It bewilders me to think that this didn't happen 150 years ago. This didn't happen 80 years ago. Where the people who sorted the removal of Patrick John, okay, are dead and gone, and people don't know. There are those of us who are still alive. We saw it. We know it. We heard them. We listened to them. And you must, you must ask yourself, what has happened to that spirit of independence, of independent thought, of autonomy, of the ability to confront a system that you think is not working in your favor, and instead of selling out yourself to it. So it's very sad. It's a very sad. We have had this paradigm shift, okay, in our society, in all aspects of our society. that has allowed every sector of the country to be compromised, okay, and to lose their quote unquote power, so to speak. The question we have to ask ourselves is, what society do we want to leave behind? What kind of society are we trying to build? What kind of society do we want the Dominica of tomorrow to be? Because at the heart of it, you will find that our progress will be compromised, our development will be compromised, and most specifically, the human development of our people will become to naught. Because it means, therefore, that the tenets upon which they rest, so to speak, their stability no longer exist. And when you see businessmen, when you see the church, when you see the hoteliers in Dominica having to think that, I mean, it's so sad, Dr. Thomson Fontaine, to hear that two prominent educated people can say and give an excuse for the departure of Ross in Dominica. It is sad. It is sad. And it's not being done out of any common sense. It's only being done because these people want to appease a system that is allowing them to bleed the country and to take advantage of a situation whereby they can aggrandize themselves financially. Nothing more to it. And it is very sad. It is very sad. And so you have to ask the question, Quo Vadis Dominica? Quo Vadis Dominica, when almost every institution of state seems to have been undermined, when every process of governance seems to have been abolished, when those things happen. And I'm not sure how much time we have. Maybe that could be my closing sentences. But I would dare to say, you see, that if Libla and Patrick John were to come back today, what would they see? Simple as that. You could even include Eugenia Charles, and you could include Mr. Barron. Because when you look at or even Rosie Douglas and Pierre Charles, some significant questions have to ask, in spite of whatever wrong they may have done. Okay? Because my family suffered under Eugenia Charles, and I do not think the worst of Eugenia Charles, okay, is in any semblance to the worst of what is happening today. People are afraid to speak. But we demonstrated in 1979 for the right to speak. People are afraid to write. But we demonstrated in 1979 for the right to write. People are afraid to associate themselves with, and that's what we said was wrong then. And then we have to ask ourselves, I mean, let's face it, you can speak in your own home. People are afraid that you should be seen with other people who are not. People are told, don't speak to these people because this person is not one of us. People are told where to shop. People are told where, those sorts of things. So we have to ask ourselves some pivotal questions. There are clans. There are literally clans and small groupings of supporters of this regime who will follow people's Facebook pages and WhatsApp statuses like the Gestapo in Germany only to report. There are people who for want of a better word, who move around like hyenas, attacking people, their character, their families, and going after everybody who seems not to be part of a regime. And is that what we have come to? Is that what we have come to? And I think again, if the example of Mr. Leblanc and Patrick John and the statements that were made in the 70s and 80s for the better Dominica are to be taken seriously, it should hearken us to seriously question what kind of country we want for the future, and whether we are prepared and willing to accept some of the things that are happening today, and to cease from making these excuses that we continue to make, because it's going to lead to the demise of Dominica.
Let me just put it this way for you, Simeon, and then I'm going to go over to former Prime Minister Seraphin. In case you had any doubts in your mind, and you asked the question is, what was have been on the mind of Edward LeBlanc and Patrick John and maybe even Eugenia and Edison James and his people? We have to go back and answer the question very easily. At that time, the private sector was considered, and it was called the engine of growth. It was not the government, it was the private sector. I recall when I was president, when I served as president of the DIC, we insisted that we had to set up something called a policy review committee, because we found that the government was going ahead and doing things without really involving the private sector. We insisted on it, and we got to establish a policy review committee made up of the executive of the private sector and members of the cabinet. And we met regularly. We did not try to make policy, to formulate policy for the government, but we were able to review policy that was going to affect the private sector. So in essence, what I'm saying is this: if we translate and answer your question, Simeon, Edward Oliver LeBlanc wanted the farmers to be able to go and buy their own transport, cash in the bank, take their money, and the bank is to be afraid of them, not people going and beg the bank. They would go and buy the thing. That's what Edward LeBlanc wanted. He wanted the private sector to be independent, people to be able to take care of themselves. Patrick John wanted people to be independent as well. He said, look, I'm going to, you work for your house and you get your house and you have your keys and your house is yours. Do what you want with it. Leave it for your children. Sell it. Do what you want with it. So these people wanted to see people grow. I get a sense, and it was about national development. It was always about nation building. So everybody was in one pot. It was not say, well, if you are a labor writer, if you're red or you're green or you're blue, that is not the way, not from what I recall. And I was right there, I could tell you, that was not happening at all. So in essence, I think we can see a sharp contrast. What I would like to see is for our current administration to reverse that trend that is taking place now and go back to those. It was better for everybody. The country worked, and we didn't get a chance to mention all of this manufacturing and these businesses that existed then and are no longer here with us. But it was a lot of businesses that are export oriented, doing manufacturing, agribusiness, and all kinds of things. They no longer exist. Maybe Oliver Seraphin, when he comes to wind up, he'll tell us some of those businesses that existed. You had people like C.K. Shillingford and Oliver Seraphin and Pringle moving merchandise all over the place from Dominica to the other countries, just selling Dominican products all over the place. So let me just go over to O.J. Seraphin to maybe come up with your final comments in your closing remarks.
Yes, Sheridan. Clearly, as you will note, because of the tremendous amount of work that Patrick had done, we have spent the program on his contribution to our country. So one of these days, when it's convenient, we will talk about the period that I was in government and particularly what it impacted on the international scene because of the fact of our independence and the opportunity to dialogue and to create opportunities for Dominica by the way in which we were able to establish foreign relationships, which I did with the Venezuelans and with France, etc., and with special connections with persons at the UN and at the OAS and whatnot. And I particularly like to just end by saying that the Kalinago people have had many, many years in which they were disregarded. But during the period when we were in government, increasingly the Kalinago people became involved with the possibilities for their own children to grow and develop. And we've seen the result of that by the fact of the existence of the where our good friend here was a teacher, Simeon. Joseph was a teacher, I believe, because one of my sons keep talking about him at the Margaret Foundation School, and also the development of the St. Andrew's High School, which came about when persons like Eardley Castor and B.O. Robinson had approached me about using the area of the youth camp in Wesley for the foundation, for the creation of the school there. And as a result, the students that came out of there were encouraged by the fact that in my time, I was able to give them a school bus, which brought them free of charge to the school. And there began the opportunity for young persons from the Kalinago territory to go to college, to go to high school and thus to college. And today we have quite a number of them who are now attorneys and, of course, doctors, etc., professionals that came about because of the fact that there was that moment where they were cradled by the opportunities given at this by these two high schools in the north of Dominica. Because before that, there were only a sprinkling, maybe one or two or three that I can recall, Tyson and Luke Corrett, those I can remember, who entered the high schools in Roseau. And now we have had them coming out in large numbers from that particular area. So we have to give credit to also for the construction of the new high school in the north that have given the people from the Kalinago territory some opportunity there. What must also be revisited too was the fact that the Kalinago people, as a means of survival, focused on the craft production, which we have never heard much happening over the more recent past. My wife and myself were engaged with exporting more craft than anyone else, I dare say, and where we went to various parts of the world selling the craft items in wholesale to existing distributors, etc. And there was that natural instinct that the Carib children learned how to produce craft. We don't hear much about what has happened to Lauma and Scoopine and all of that. And also the entire development of craft throughout Dominica. We purchase craft in like the hats, in Chapopai, in Grand Bay, and boats, miniature boats from Gouda, and baskets from Penville, and the workshop for the blind also assisted in producing quite a number of craft items. So did the prison who were producing craft, which we sold in large numbers overseas. And we don't hear much about what's happening with that craft industry of Dominica, even including the use of the soil, for pottery and so on, which we purchased from the nuns, from the Catholic priests in Marigot and in Bafeste. So there is that area of the craft development which have been abandoned, which need to go back there and find out, because the marketing of craft from Dominica was essential to the cruise industry. We have a number of boats coming in throughout the Eastern Caribbean and through St. Thomas and Puerto Rico, etc., where the craft could be sold. So we need to look and revisit. We had Dr. Herbal Doctor, who came in there under the time that I was in government, and where the effort towards establishing the herbal cures and as a form of medical benefits to incoming visitors, where Dominica was supposed to have been made the center for herbal products, and Blows Agro Products was also part of that, producing teas from the herbal teas that we can plant in Dominica, and floriculture, which again I was involved with. So we are saying here that the people who were involved with all of those things have virtually disappeared. Maturin was a guy who was closely associated with me in terms of beginning the process of preparing gardens in the Concord area for the purpose of producing it in order to package it. And the young man, Maturin, died recently, and all he could end up with was paper bags in the Four Corners, as some people recall, with very good ideas for curing various aspects of our health. I read up to a couple of days ago how great mango leaves is for our system of herbal cure, and so on. So there are several areas that have not been utilized in terms of our development process, have been abandoned. So herbal teas and the ideas that came out of that is a critical part of how we can rebuild our infrastructure of growth in the agricultural community. We do not talk anything about how we can get crayfish and all of that being produced in ponds with the amount of rivers we have. So there's a lot of areas. I think that there's need also, and that's why I'm saying that in my contribution, I would like to say this, that we need to have an economic committee of international proportion that could advise, we have the cooperative movement that has virtually disappeared in terms of its activity, which was so profound during the time I was Minister of Cooperatives. And that has also been left to just lie low. Nobody's interested in forming cooperatives anymore. And there's government having a lot of lands that they have taken from Londonderry and from Wesley and other places, lands belonging to the state that could be given to young school cooperatives that leave the high schools that were educated in agriculture and that we could get involved with. So there's a lot of potential for development and growth in our country. And what we need is an entrepreneurial spirit supported by policies of government by which funding would be made available, And of course, the fact that we do not have the feeder roads that we used to have before, we need to find ways and means to reconstruct that. And the whole idea of CBI money is a good idea. And whilst people give themselves praise for CBI, in fact, in 1979, I had arranged through an arrangement for some people who were seeking to escape from some political situations that they could have got, and a bill was passed in Parliament, and it is there for reading for those who want to research it, that the first CBI program came from the Iranian program. And there it was that they were supposed to have invested $1 million per person for arrival in Dominica, and then also to have a $50,000 that will be put in an escrow account to ensure that they are giving us the right information that we are seeking. And that $1 million is supposed to go for small business development, etc., and for hotel development for the indigenous community. So we need to re-examine our history in a more profound way. I believe that what you have started, Mr. Gregoire, in terms of putting together some of the brighter people of Dominica and the diaspora, like the two doctors we have there, and of course Simeon, who's very articulate. I believe the time has come when we must stop talking about situations and find a mechanism by some kind of structure of involvement that we could then pass on the good word to those who are not able to do it for themselves, by establishing some kind of arrangement among persons in the diaspora to add an engine to the vehicle that we're trying to leave the station. And that's what I have to say for now.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot for those closing remarks here, former Prime Minister Seraphin. I wanted to go over to Dr. George for his only sort of final closing remarks as we wind down, Dr. George, and I'll go to Simeon after.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Gregoire. As always, thank you for inviting me on this panel. I really enjoyed it. I think the contributions by all the panelists were very profound. I will say, with the last statement of the former Prime Minister, that we have an organization right now which is called NIDCLIF. It's Nature Island Dominica Civil Liberties Foundation. And some of the issues that you have raised, we are thinking of ways in which we could make these very practical. So maybe Mr. Gregoire might share that information with you. We welcome persons to join that effort. In fact, recently I heard an ad on QFM talking about NIDCLIF. And so, yes, I think we are trying to pull resources in all sorts of the wood of resources, both financial and human resource as well, etc., to deal with some of those concerns that you raised. Of course, Mr. Gregoire, I want to express my gratitude for having such a series on the leaders in Dominica, where we can compare and contrast economically in terms of political stature, freedoms of individuals, and to really look for a way forward. I think, as always, ultimately, the purpose of this program is to educate and to build up our country. We do it with the sincerest of heart because we all want good for Dominica. I would say on this note, I appreciate the contributions of all the panelists. Lambi, thank you very much. Thank you for the listeners, and have a good night. Sheridan, your mic off.
Sorry about that. I was just saying thanks a lot, Dr. George, for your final words there. The organization that you mentioned, NIDCLIF, is the, as you said, Nature Island Dominica Civil Liberties Foundation. The website is nidclf.org, nidclf.org. Anybody can go right there and take a look and see what it is trying to accomplish for Dominica. It is registered in the state of Georgia. It's a not-for-profit organization, and I hope it can attract resources that can help certain things that can take place in Dominica. So we hope that will come on stream and start really working very, very soon. It is on stream, but we're now waiting for the 501c3 status so you can have that tax exempt. So any corporation that want to make contributions can then have their tax refund from that. So this is where we are with that now. But I just wanted to go over to Simeon for final word. You have the last word, Simeon?
Well, first of all, again, I want to express and echo the sentiments of the others for this initiative on recognizing our former leaders. I think it's very fitting that this is done because, Dominica has lots of heroes. There are a lot of precursors to our history and to our achievement and development. And I think this is highly appreciative that we can spend some time to get to know who are the people who have brought us where we are today. That's the first thing. The second thing I'd like to say as we reflect on the life of Patrick John and thinking of our leaders, I think it's not too late to turn the country around. It's not too late for us to begin to see a better Dominica. It's not too late for us as a people to come together and recognize that the forces that are pulling us apart and cannot be as strong as the elements that can bring us together as a people. We exist in a political divide, in a very polemic political environment now, where people have been pitted against each other because of color. And that is sad for Dominica, where persons have been deprived of opportunities because of their political positions, where persons have been allowed to see each other as enemies rather than fellow countrymen and friends and fellow workers in the task of rebuilding Dominica. We have a long way to go. When we think of the initiative by Mr. Libla, whom you started with last week, the innovations of Patrick John that we are discussing tonight, the contributions of people like Oliver Seraphin and Eugenia Charles and all the others, they have all made their contributions. What we need to start doing in Dominica is start building on the legacy of others who have gone before so that we can optimize our potential as Dominicans. And it is time that the powers that be, the people with the purse, with the power, and the possession in Dominica begin to realize that Dominica doesn't belong to them. It belongs to all of us. And they have to think of their own legacy, because Frank Barron left his legacy. Libla left his legacy. Patrick John left his legacy. Eugenia Charles, Oliver Seraphin, Ruzi, and Pierre Charles have all left their legacy, along with the administrations that they governed. What is going to be the legacy of this current government when people look back? Are they going to say that they divided the country? That they deprived people of the opportunities for growth and development? That the resources of the state were not put at the disposal for the benefit of its citizenry? What is going to be its legacy? I think it's time that begins to be the process of reflection, because no government stays in power forever. The country remains. And so the appeal tonight is stemming from the great works of those who have gone before. We have a chance to renew, to make things new, to bring everybody on board, to draw from the experiences of those who have gone before and the efforts and the initiatives of those who started the journey towards independence, and to see how we can make the next 40 years of Dominica become one that is incomparable to any other country in the Caribbean, so that when people look back onto what happens in Dominica today, it will be a story of satisfaction, a story of felt achievement that the governance of Dominica in 2021, 2022 built upon, strengthened, and gave Dominica a chance to thrive and to succeed. It's not too late. It's not too late. And I want to appeal to the leaders of Dominica today. It is not too late to start afresh, to make Dominica a better place for all of us.
And thank you a lot for that, Simeon. As a matter of fact, if we were to look at not too far down the road, instead of 40, 50 years from now, I mean, we're going to be 50 years old as a country, 50th anniversary of independence in 2028. We should, in fact, look at that as the benchmark by when we want to achieve some of those things. So I think the work that we're doing now, very happy to be a part of this, because we're looking at the lives and the leaderships and the legacies of our former leaders. And we can see all of them, they have added value. They've all added value. And when we next week, we're going to be looking at the others, we'll be looking down the road at people like Eugenia Charles and Edison James, and then Rosie Douglas and Pierre Charles, and then to our current Prime Minister, Roosevelt Skerritt. But the question you raise is a very, very important question. What will be his legacy? There's something that he needs to think about. I mean, Patrick John did live his, Frank Barron did live his, Oliver Seraphin did, LeBlanc did, Eugenia Charles did, Edison James did. So in fact, we are going to have to be putting this, and our Prime Minister now should be thinking about what would be his legacy. And clearly, so I think the work we're doing here now is educating and informing the younger people who really had no idea about the legacies of those people. They only know this regime. Anyone who's 35 years old only knows this regime in their adult lives. So they really have no idea what Oliver Seraphin accomplished or what Patrick John or Frank Barron accomplished. This is why we're doing this. I think it's very important for us to do this. And when we're through doing this, we can look to see then how we can help build on those legacies, the right way for Dominica to go. Because let's face it, there must have been something very right about the fact that when LeBlanc was there, farmers in Wesley and Marigot and Calabish and Salute were able to go down to town and buy their transport cash, pay cash. There must have been something very right about that. Today I'm hearing people telling the farmers, go to the aid bank and take a loan. And the farmers are saying, I haven't got the collateral. Bus drivers say, go take a loan, and they haven't got the collateral. I think there's something to be learned from those legacies left behind by some of our former leaders. Some of those things we need to begin emulating as we go forward. So, gentlemen, I want to thank everyone who has been listeners tonight, who didn't have a chance to call, everyone who has been with us on Facebook. I want to thank also Lambi and Sherwin for keeping us on the air. And I want to thank Justice Dr. Irving Andre. He had to go leave us on a very important matter. He's working all the time. And then Thomson Fontaine, who also had lived, Thomson. This is a godforsaken hour for him. It's like, what time is it in South Sudan now? It's like maybe 5 o'clock in the morning. So he's now gone to bed to go to work this morning. So, and I want to thank Simeon and former Prime Minister Oliver Seraphin and Dr. Dion George for being with us here tonight and participating in this conversation. And I hope many of our people have learned something that maybe they didn't know before, and that might help them in probably giving some direction and some guidance to persons on whom they have some influence in their private life, who maybe know somebody who can influence somebody who's a policy directorate, and to maybe get some changes, some shifts, some paradigm shifts, as Simeon would say, in some of the policies, that we can create a more enabling environment for all of our people together as one nation to move forward, where everybody can do better, improve quality of life, improve standard of living, where we can protect our environment, our natural heritage. So, gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for being here tonight and for contributing to this exercise. It's just left for me to say a very pleasant good night to each and every one of you. Lambi, OJ, Simeon, everybody, Dion, Dr. Andre, Dr. Thomson, and all of you on Facebook and listeners. Good night, everybody. Take care. Bye for now.
Yeah, killer. Shout out to them DJs that are gonna drop this one. Fearless.